Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
It seemed to her that she would always be among the losers, but it was just an episode in her life. 5 years of school are behind her. Tomorrow was the graduation ceremony. Kelly couldn't believe this was it. The next thing was sailing on her own. Some of the girls were able to arrange jobs in advance. When internships were held in schools, Kelly was also offered by the director of the Lyceum, where she worked for a month and a half in the 5th year. Only more hustling classmate Betty has already hustled and first applied to that Lyceum, and there she was gladly taken. But Kelly was not discouraged. She'd find a job for sure. And now graduation. Her dorm roommates had curlers on from the night before. Everyone wanted to look beautiful for graduation. But Kelly does not need any curlers. Her hair is naturally thick, curly, straight brown waterfall. In general, Kelly is beautiful, brown eyes, light skin, slender, like a twig. The girls even envy her a little. "Kelly, you don't have to work at all. Why do you want to go to school?" Kathy said, "You just wink at some millionaire and he'll call you to the registry office." "Yeah, by the leg." Kelly waved me off. "What do I need millionaires for? They're all fat, bald. What's that all of a sudden?" The girls laughed, because while he was making his millions, the years passed. "And I don't need millionaire girls. I want to meet my love." Kelly confessed, just once and for all. Who doesn't dream of that? Nancy sighed. "That's what I want too. But that's just the way it is in the movies. In life, wherever you look, all the guys are either some kind of underachievers, or how can I put it mildly? They're not interested in girls. Oh, Nancy, you like to exaggerate everything." Lisa disagreed with her. "I'm like Kelly. I believe my soulmate is out there somewhere." And the girls chatted and chatted, forgetting the time. And when they looked at the clock, they gasped. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. Tomorrow's presentation at 10 o'clock. Urgent, all to bed. And in the morning, the room was in turmoil. The girls painted eyelashes, did each other's hair, dressed up, and then all rushed, clacking their heels down the stairs. Wendy the janitor saw them off with a smile, wondering how fast time had flown by. Just yesterday, these girls were very young, and today they were so beautiful. It was crowded at the award ceremony. Yesterday's students, teachers, parents. Kelly looked at her classmates with a little sadness at whose parents were able to come. Her friends' moms had come too, and Nancy's dad, an important man in a jacket. And no one came to Kelly's. There was no one. The year Kelly went to college, her mom was gone. She was the only relative in the girl's life, and it so happened that she raised Kelly alone, and never said a word about her father, neither bad nor good, as if he was not even in nature. Kelly and her mother lived in a small working village without anyone's help and support, and when her mom was gone, Kelly didn't even want to go to school. And only her mother's words shortly before she left prevented her from doing so. "You, my daughter, go here, get an education. In this life, you only need to rely on yourself." Mom said the day before, as if she had a premonition of something. "And forgive me, I'm not a good helper." And that's the only time she ever mentioned her father, like Kelly. He's a big name in town. He must be in a position of power somewhere. And that was it. By morning, Mom was gone. Kelly overcame herself and went away to study. It was hard for her without support and only payments for loss of breadwinners saved, and also worked part-time girl in a night stall in the dormitory. That's how she lived, and she didn't look for her father. Somehow she didn't gather her courage. And how could she look for him? She will not be all brown-eyed, dark-haired famous people suspect paternity. Let her live as she knows how. Did not know about her for so many years, and now do not need. Kelly was distracted from sad thoughts by fanfare. The rector came out, then the dean. They said something. Then the awarding of diplomas. Everything went great. After the newly minted specialists, the whole company rushed to the embankment in a street cafe. So they decided to spend their studentship simply and cheerfully, and all succeeded. Late at night, standing by the river, the girls dreamed. Now all roads are open before them. A new and happy life was ahead of them, and in a week they had to move out of the dormitory. It was easier for Nancy and Lisa. Their parents had rented apartments for them. Kathy had moved in with her aunt temporarily. But Kelly had a lot of work to do. She couldn't just rent an apartment. She just didn't have the money. So she looked for an apartment, and the janitor helped her. Grandma Wendy had a relative who lived downtown. Her younger sister had recently buried her husband. Her kids have their own lives, and she has a 4-bedroom apartment. Can you believe it? That's what Wendy's grandma said. That's a lot of utility bills. She keeps complaining to me that half of her money is spent on the bills. She says we should get a tenant, so she asked me to find her a place. And maybe I'm not suitable for her. Kelly sighed. And how much will she charge me? Oh, don't worry, waved his hand janitoress. You will get along with her. She, of course, a woman with a temper, not for nothing that all her life married to the chief of police was, and with her older son does not communicate, although he lives in the city. But that's their personal affairs, so she is quite adequate and will not take much, you'll see. There was nothing to do, Kelly agreed. The same day she went to the address Wendy had given her. The door was opened by a woman about 60 years old in a Chinese kimono with some impossible hairstyle on her head. In her arms was a bald cat. Kelly, seeing the animal, even shuddered. She didn't understand why they had to have such monsters, but she didn't let on. She introduced herself, explained why she was here. Yes, Wendy told me. The woman answered with a yawn. Come in. My name is Vanessa. The apartment was lavish, the kind of furnishings Kelly had only seen in movies, and she was confused. And the landlady didn't have enough to pay the utilities. Anyway, here we go. Vanessa began, scratching her sphinx behind the ear. I won't charge you anything for the room. Only the utilities will be shared. And you'll also help me around the house. Clean, cook. Go to the store. Go and look after Tom, if anything. Tom? Kelly was surprised. Yes, for Tom. Vanessa replied defiantly and pointed at the cat. Or do you think he has a bad name? No, do you? Kelly nodded in confusion. It's a good name, and he's a very nice cat. Although, to be honest, the name Tom in her mind suggested a different animal, a fluffy, fat cat. Like she and Mom used to have, but not this one, like the chicken in the store. What can you do? It wasn't the animal's fault. Kelly smiled. Cute kitty, cute kitty, cute. Vanessa's smile blossomed into a smile. The cat meowed something unhappily in response. Okay, let's go. I'll show you your room. But Vanessa, you know that I'm getting a job. I can only help you in the evenings. Get a job. Vanessa shrugged. We'll adjust your schedule so you can get everywhere. Kelly was a little embarrassed that the woman had already planned everything for her, but she had no choice because Kelly had to live somewhere. The room was the smallest in the apartment, but it was cozy. There were no expensive things here. Everything was simple and practical, and Kelly was fine with that. Vanessa explained that her housekeeper had lived here for a while, and then she quit. I've been on my own with Tom ever since. Vanessa sighed. Do you know how hard it is to be alone? Come on, get settled in. And in an hour we'll have tea." And exactly an hour later they were sitting in the kitchen. Vanessa said that after her husband was gone, she was very lonely, and the children had all gone away. Vanessa sighed. The daughter lives abroad, the younger son in New York, and the eldest, well, God be with him. He's fine. Kelly realized that there was some family problem, but it was somehow not tactful to ask for more details, so she didn't say anything. Vanessa's tea was delicious, and the service was so beautiful. It was the first time Kelly drank tea from such beautiful cups. Her husband had brought them back from a business trip. I don't remember where he went. Vanessa explained, noticing Kelly looking at the patterns on the cup. "Real Chinese porcelain. Well, we've had our tea, and that's enough. Why don't you tidy up the place and be careful with the cups? Ton and I are going to go and have a rest." And she and the cat, who sat in her arms like a wooden one, left the kitchen and looked in again. Then washed the window here, because something dusty already. Badly last week. Probably the housekeeper cleaned. And also go to the store. I'll make you a list. And I also need to water the flowers in the living room and loosen them. Oh, it's the other way around. "Vanessa, I have to go to the dorms to get my stuff." Kelly barely got a word in between the hostess's instructions. "You'll do everything, and then you'll go." Vanessa shrugged her lips. "I'll remind you that you're living here for free, so you have to help me for that." Kelly nodded in response. What to do? She had no other option. She would have to adjust to Vanessa. In the evening, Kelly finally went to the dormitory to get her things. Grandma Wendy was on watch. "So, Kelly, are you talking to Vanessa?" When she saw the girl, the old lady was the first to speak. "I did." Kelly nodded tiredly. "I see she's already filling you with errands." Wendy grinned. "Oh, sister. She's used to having everyone running around her. Don't be mad, baby. I just want what's best for you. She's not bad. You just have to find an approach to her." Kelly just smiled back. And Wendy herself, I wondered if she'd found an approach to her sister. But come on, it's not like living on the street. What a nice place. The next day, Kelly decided to go to the nearest schools in the neighborhood. Maybe she'd get lucky. At the first school, they looked at her like she was an alien. "What are the stakes?" "We've been staffed for years, only professionals." At the second school, they asked for her diploma. "Oh, you have a C for literature?" The principal exclaimed, looking at the diploma insert. "You coped with the university program, and now you want to work in a school. What will you teach your children?" "This is the only C." Kelly replied with a grudge, "And I got it the first time, while others took it 3 times. And I'm not interested in others." With a grin replied the principal, "You came to us. It is not knowing whether you really studied. Maybe you bought a diploma in the crosswalk." That was too much, but Kelly just flashed a glare, said nothing and left, slamming the door. C's. You'd think that only those who graduated with a red diploma would work at this very ordinary school. Kelly was moved to tears by the unfounded accusations. She had studied conscientiously for 5 years, was one of the most successful students in the course, and here's some nasty suspicions. Say, bought a diploma. Why are they talking to her like that? In the third school, she found the answer to this question. The administration wasn't there, but the words of the eager technician explained everything to Kelly. "What are you, sweetie? No one will take you from the street," said the woman when she heard that Kelly was looking for a job. "They have their own rules here, matchmaker, brother, neighbor, and so on. Besides, the old teachers take 2 jobs and will never give them to anyone in their life. It's only on TV they say that young people don't go to school, but in reality they have all taken their places and can't be moved. Kelly listened to the woman and felt so sad. Why did she go to school? And what a fool she had been. After all, the director of the Lyceum offered her a job then, and she still thought. Now it's too late. Back in the apartment, Kelly immediately received an assignment to take out the trash, take things to the dry cleaners, and go to the pharmacy for vitamins for the cat. Kelly, get exactly the vitamins I wrote down. Vanessa held out a piece of paper with the name of the medication and the money. Kelly nodded tiredly and left the apartment again. She wanted to get some rest after running around school. Her head hurt a little. The girl swallowed the pill and quickened her step. Now she would do everything, go back to her room and lie down. What did you buy? Vanessa was indignant when Kelly returned and gave her the jar of vitamins and the change. It's a different manufacturer. But the pharmacy said there was no difference. It had the same ingredients. Kelly objected. How much do you understand? These pills make Tom dizzy. Kelly shrugged her shoulders and laughed to herself. How did Vanessa know that Tom was dizzy? Had he told her that? But her mood soured when Vanessa told her that in addition to the utility bills, Kelly now owed for those vitamins. Vanessa, I haven't even earned a penny yet. The girl almost begged. I'll pay it all back, only a little later. And I wondered where they would take you, such a foolish girl. Vanessa grinned back. You know what, girl? You should make up your mind. I'm not doing charity work. Oh, by the way, do the dishes in the kitchen. And she and the cat went to her room. And Kelly stared at the sink full of dishes. When had that woman gotten so many dishes dirty? Kelly had left the kitchen perfectly clean this morning. And somehow it's strange. In fact, she performs the functions of a housekeeper, and she has to pay for accommodation. Food was out of the question. Kelly ate in the canteen, and here in the apartment only tea and drank. After a week, the girl realized that she and Vanessa would not be able to live under the same roof for long. Instructions came like from the Horn of Plenty as soon as Kelly stepped over the threshold. And then there's the ridicule. What kind of school is this? The landlady liked to say, scrubbing floors, that's what you do. And you're a troublemaker, just like my eldest son. He's a troublemaker too. All his life he was fussing, looking for a better life, not listening to his mother. And now what? Kelly wouldn't listen to her, but Vanessa went on. He was looking for love, and then he found himself an otter. He wouldn't listen to his mother. He lives with her, almost never comes to see me. Once a year he checks if she's still alive. It's fine that he got a higher education. He's still a fool. And so are you. What's the use of your diploma when you don't know anything about life? What do I know? Kelly asked resentfully. For this life with teeth should be grasped, and where necessary, and go over the heads. And you don't have it in you. You're spineless. Listening to Vanessa's insults, the girl did not want to listen anymore. She gathered her things, threw the key on the nightstand in the hallway, and went to the exit. What a touchy one. Vanessa shouted goodbye to her. Look, what a princess. Kelly didn't answer her. And only when she jumped out of the entrance, sat on a bench and cried. Maybe Vanessa was right. You have to go head to head in this life. But is it the right thing to do? Her mom always said that one should respect another person's opinion, be more tolerant, show kindness of heart. And what happened? Her mom was just over 40 when she died. She never hurt anyone in her life. She worked in a village school, and that was it. She didn't achieve anything. They even had a service apartment. After her mother died and she was taken away, Kelly herself also tried to live according to her conscience. But there was always a brazen grasp ahead. Become like that? No, disgusting. Kelly can't. What is it, sweetheart? Are you from Vanessa's? From apartment 12? She heard a woman's voice and looked up. There was an old lady standing next to her, a dandelion of a woman. Kelly nodded back. The old woman had fooled another girl again. The old woman sighed and sat down next to her, and then she told her story. It turns out that Vanessa has been practicing this for a long time. She finds girls who urgently need a place to live. Most often she finds such girls through acquaintances, so that they were decent, and as if for free, but loads her with so much work that the housekeeper has to work there from dawn to dusk. And the girls have their own lives and their main job. Some will live a month, some 2. There was one who lasted about a year. But you, baby, you're just a newcomer. Yeah, a little over a week. Kelly nodded. But I can't go any longer. That's right. I can't stand that woman. She's been bossy all her life. Her husband was only a boss at work, but at home he was her boss. Her children, she has 3 of them. The younger ones ran away from her as soon as they were on their feet. And the eldest, William, was always Vanessa's sort of unloved son, but he did everything for her and took her groceries and medicine, she said. And then she got fed up with him and started divorcing him and his wife. Not only that, in his youth, the man did not give life. All the bride, he was looking for a more profitable bride. And here she began. In general, he broke up with his mother in a puff of smoke and dust. He hasn't come to visit for a year now, but he calls, that's for sure. He sends her food and money through his driver. Vanessa keeps crying, saying she's poor and unhappy. She's insolent. Let her live with her bald man and her cat. And you, little girl, are right not to put up with it. It's better to live on the street than with such a landlady, said the old lady and went to the entrance, and Kelly only smiled sadly. It's good to think like that when you have a place to live. But what should she do? She decided to call her friends. Nancy was very happy when she heard her friend and immediately bragged that her father had arranged a job for her as a secretary in one of the institutions of the city. Nancy, I don't have a place to live. Kelly shared her distress. No way. That's the trouble. Oh, but I don't know what I can do to help you. Can I stay with you for a few days? I'll find something later. I've got some money left over from my old job at the stall. I think I can find something cheap. Oh, really? Nancy exclaimed. Kelly, I'd love to, but I can't. When they rented out my apartment, the owners told me not to have any guests, because you know what niggers are like, they'll rat you out. Okay, I'm sorry to bother you, Nancy. No, it's fine. You call me if you need anything. And Nancy disconnected the phone first. There you go. Kelly grinned sadly. One less friend, but Lisa shouldn't say no, she's easier. Where's it going? Lisa, as soon as she heard Kelly's problem, told her that she had already met a great guy, and now he was living at her place, and the apartment was a studio. Once again, Kelly apologized for disturbing the peace of her friend. She fervently wished the girl to solve all her problems soon. Kelly, I'm sure everything will be fine. You just keep your head up. You will definitely everything will work out, Lisa said. Kelly was the first to interrupt the conversation. She didn't really want to call Kathy. They'd always gotten on a little better somehow. Kathy is mocking, sarcastic even. Kelly was always a little uncomfortable with her remarks, but she called, What are you crying about? Kathy exclaimed when she heard Kelly sniffle as she recounted her misfortune. Well, get on the first bus and go to the end of the line. I'll meet you at the stop. Kathy, what about your aunt? Kelly asked shyly. She wouldn't like having a stranger in the apartment. My Aunt Miranda is a worldly woman. Of course we'll be a little cramped, but we'll get by. I can't just leave you on the street. We're friends." "Thank you, Kathy." "Sneeze again, Kelly. I thought you'd say no, too." "What do you mean, too?" "So, Nancy, did Lisa call yet?" Rats. Kathy was outraged. Well, to hell with them. Let them go on with their lives. But you go to my place. Soon the girls met at the bus stop, hugged each other, and Kelly was met at the apartment by a young and pretty woman, about 30 years old. "And this is my aunt." Kathy introduced her with a smile. "Aunt Miranda, my mom's younger sister." "Oh, Kathy, if you call me Auntie again, I'll drag you away by your ears." The relative laughed with a white-toothed smile. "I'm Miranda. I think there used to be such a series." Kelly smiled. "Oh, baby, my life is cooler than any show." Miranda laughed, and then the three of them drank tea in the kitchen and talked about nothing. Kelly was melting her soul. Yes, she'd been wrong about Kathy. Kathy was the only one to give her a helping hand in a difficult situation, and Miranda was so friendly. My auntie would give any man a head start. Kathy whispered to Kelly in the late afternoon when they were already asleep on the sofa. "She's a racer." "A racer? How come you never told me about her before?" "Yes, she and my mother quarreled more than 10 years ago. My mother and grandparents wanted her to continue the family tradition. She also went to the Pedagogical Institute, and Miranda sent everyone far away and got a job in the city in a cafe as a waitress. Then she met her first husband, and he left her this apartment when they separated. By then she'd opened a little store. She started selling car parts, not groceries. She met a customer at the store, a professional race car driver. He became her second husband. She started riding with him, and then she split up with him. But they're still friends, unlike the first one. They continue to participate in all sorts of motorsport competitions together. And the store? It's a store. Miranda runs it, and she hired me as a sales girl." "Kathy, you went into sales? I don't understand. Why did you go to college? You sound just like my mother, higher education and all that. What do I need that education for? To earn pennies? No, I'll earn much more here, and I like it. Maybe you'll find yourself a racing driver husband too. It's not out of the question." And the girls laughed, so much so that Miranda from the next room said sleepily, "Girls, it's nighttime." Kelly and Kathy fell silent, but for a long time they whispered about their own girlish things. In the morning they went about their business. Kelly decided to go to school again, as she had another school in mind. The principal, a middle-aged man, received her immediately. He looked at her silently for a long time while she explained how she loved children and dreamed of working at the school. But he didn't even look at her diploma. "Do you have a medical book?" the principal asked with interest. "Yes, of course." Kelly nodded. "And you went through everything there?" "All the tests? The gynecologist?" The director licked his lips and grinned wickedly. "All of them," Kelly answered, and she herself just shuddered from his grin and prickly eyes. "Well then, come back tomorrow. Write an application. We'll take you to social pedagogues." "Why social pedagogues? I'm an English teacher." "Well, we only have a social pedagogue position available, but if you and I work together, we'll see what we can do." Kelly nodded and stormed out of the office. The girl cried with embarrassment and indignation. Is that what he was implying now? This principal? What a horror! She would never set foot in that school again as long as there were such leaders. After that, Kelly sat in the park for a long time thinking. Maybe she was going down the wrong road. If she couldn't get a job at her school, then maybe she shouldn't. Maybe Kathy was right to go to work at the store. And as if on purpose, on her way home, she saw an ad on the door of one of the supermarkets announcing that they needed sales clerks and cashiers. She immediately went in and asked about the vacancy and was gladly hired. One more salesperson in this world. Miranda joked when she found out where Kelly had gotten the job. "You're doing the right thing. You've got to be able to move on in this life." Yeah, one more salesman, and somewhere out there in another life crying, unrecognized teacher. Kathy picked up on that. "It's okay, life is long. Maybe I'll work in a school, but for now I have to earn a living. I can't stay with you forever," answered Kelly. "Yes, Kelly, you're doing the right thing." Miranda agreed. "No, I'm not hounding you, but you have your own life. So, Auntie, should I look for something for myself too?" Jokingly asked Kathy. "Oh, Kathy, I still have to marry you, and then you'll move out. And there, you'll see and my parents and your mother, for this good deed, I will thank me. You're looking for a millionaire." Kathy wouldn't stop. "Yeah, now a millionaire. I'll need one myself." The aunt and her niece joked and laughed heartily, and Kelly laughed with them. So easily and quickly they were suddenly friends, and Kathy opened up to her in a new way. A true friend, one of 3 left. Kelly blended into the new team quickly and easily. Working in the trade was already familiar to her. Of course, there was a big store, but the principle of work had not changed. Be polite, smile, and keep an eye on the availability of goods. Kelly didn't get a job at the cash register right away. "I had to work in the sales area, but after a month or so, the girl sat behind the cash register. Here was more responsible, but Kelly was not afraid. She knew how to count money. With customers was friendly. Once before closing time, a young man ran into the store, quickly dived between the rows, and in just a minute was at the cash register. Just a sprinter. Kelly smiled to herself and punched a can of drink. 120, she said. The guy reached into his pocket for his wallet, his face stretched out. "Did I leave my wallet at home?" He mumbled confusedly. "Young lady, you wait, please. I'll run to get the money. I'm not far away. I live next door. We are already closing." Monotonously for Kelly, answered her partner Molly. "Come back tomorrow, young man." "Yes, I need to now. I'll fall asleep without energy, and I still have half the night to work." "And what do you work?" Kelly asked me. "I'm nothing important," answered the guy, continuing to feel his pockets in the hope of finding at least some change. "But if it's not important, then all the more so," Molly said firmly. "Molly, wait." Kelly stopped her gently and turned to the guy. "I have already punched the goods anyway. Let me put my money in now, and you'll bring it to me tomorrow?" "I work in the morning." The guy nodded gratefully in response and vowed to be at the store at 9 o'clock tomorrow. "Kelly, are you stupid?" Molly asked her. As soon as the guy disappeared with the purchase. "You do realize you gave this guy his shopping spree, right?" "I think he's coming." With a smile, Kelly replied, "I can see he's honest. They're all honest as long as they want something." Molly grinned. "You're a simple soul, and if you keep doing that, you'll be working for thanks." "But I was wrong, Molly. In the morning at exactly 9 o'clock, as promised, the guy was already in the store. He gave Kelly the money and then held out a modest bouquet of chrysanthemums. "Here you go." "Oh, come on." Kelly was embarrassed. "No, you don't." "Yes, you do." The guy was staring at Kelly with his eyes wide open. Such a beautiful girl deserves to be given flowers every day. "My name's Kevin, by the way." "Kelly, I know." The guy smiled, nodding at his name tag, and the two of them laughed merrily. In the evening, Kevin waited for Kelly outside the store, walked her home, and told her about himself. He, like Kelly, had come to the city from the country. He was good at sports at school, especially good at soccer. He went to a physical education technical school. At first, he played in a soccer team for his school, then for the city. He went to various competitions, showed great promise, and then an injury. And now he works at a sports school as a coach. You said yesterday you were working nights? Kelly remembered. Hey, Kevin brushed it off. Yes, I watch the matches. It's very important for my work. I watch, I memorize. I see. Kelly nodded. Good for you. You work by profession anyway, and I'm a teacher of English language and literature, and I sit at the cash register. So you're a teacher? Kevin was surprised. We're almost colleagues? Sort of. Kelly laughed. They agreed to meet the next night and said goodbye, just shaking hands. Kathy, I met such a cute guy. Kelly was telling her friend. He's a soccer player. Wow. Miranda overheard and jumped in. What team does he play on? He doesn't play on any team. He works at a sports school now. Kelly shrugged. He's a great guy. Dude, they're all great until they get their way. Kathy sighed. You'd better be careful with him. Get to know him first. You sound just like your mommy. Kelly dismissed it. No, Kathy's right. Miranda agreed with her niece. Who knows about that athlete? Before you know it, you'll be with child. And your soccer player will be out of the picture. I wasn't thinking of anything like that. Kelly blushed. You should think about it. Miranda said instructively. Okay, girls, let's go to sleep. Kelly couldn't sleep half the night, thinking about Kevin. No, he's nice. He's really nice. Soon they started dating. Kevin was staying in a friend's house too. After a bit of thinking, they decided to rent a small apartment, old, unrenovated, almost without furniture. There was only a sofa, a table, and an old refrigerator. But it was cheap. Miranda and Kathy helped Kelly make some minor repairs and left, making her promise that if anything went wrong, they'd kick Kevin to the curb. Kelly promised, even though she knew she wouldn't send him away, because she loved him with all her heart. And a couple months later, they signed, simply, without guests and outfits, decided that the money is not enough. Why splurge? Especially since Kevin's parents are old and live far away. Kelly has no family at all. Miranda and Kathy have gotten distant lately. They've got their own lives. Better save up for a down payment on a mortgage. They were thinking of buying this place in the future. So what if it's old? They'll renovate it. They had a real honeymoon. Or rather, a week when they got time off work. No, they didn't go abroad or to the sea. They just had a good time together. They walked around the city, rode the river streetcars, just enjoyed each other. And Kelly, that was enough. The first problem started when Kevin got into trouble at work. One of his students was injured during warm-ups, and Kevin was blamed for it. Oversight. The kid had powerful parents, and Kevin was fired. Kelly was the main target, but she took it calmly because she was sure that Kevin will soon find a new job. And what happened at the old one was just an unfortunate misunderstanding. A month went by. Kevin couldn't find anything. Why don't you try being a security guard? Kelly suggested it. There's an opening at our store. Are you kidding me? That's when Kevin got mad. I'm an athlete first and foremost, and you're telling me to sit around. No, I've got a couple other options. They should call soon. But no one called him. Kevin sat on the couch all day, watching TV, more and more soccer games, coming home from work at night. Kelly would start washing dirty dishes in the sink, cooking dinner, cleaning up. On her timid remarks, say, "You can do something around the house for the day," Kevin replied that this is not a man's work. And why did I marry you if I myself will cook soup and wash socks?" he said. Once again he pressed the button on the remote control, and into the apartment burst another broadcast of a soccer match, and money was in short supply. So Kelly found a part-time job. She got a job on an educational website as a supervisor. Checked the work of guys who were preparing for exams on online courses. An old laptop, which the woman bought not so long ago, became a good assistant. Of course, he did not solve all the material problems, but now it was possible not to puzzle over what to pay for the apartment. After a while, Kevin began to leave the house in the evenings. He'd come in the morning. He smelled of booze. To all Kelly's questions, he'd say, "He's a man, he's entitled. What do you have a right to?" One day, Kelly couldn't take it anymore and she started screaming, "Go out at night, drink on my money?" "Oh, that's how you talk." Kevin got angry. "So it's your money?" "I thought it was mutual. We're like a family, but you're the man. You're kind of the breadwinner." "I know we're a family. Do you?" "Kevin, when I married you, I thought we were gonna work things out together. And you put it all on me. You sit in front of the TV all day, and now you're drinking." Kelly yelled, "Yeah, it's a mess, but it has to be dealt with. What kind of man are you? You sit on my neck and you're happy. Oh, you don't like me as a man?" Kevin caught on to the word and took a swing. That night he hit Kelly for the first time, slapped her. The woman cried in the kitchen all night. In the morning, on his knees, Kevin apologized. He swore that soon everything would change. He would find a job. Kelly wouldn't have to work 2 jobs and sleep 4 o'clock a night. Yeah, things would change. And Kelly believed him and decided to forget the slap. After all, she provoked it. Shouldn't have charged him when he'd been drinking. After a week, Kevin had really changed. Eyes lit up. Drove around, made a couple phone calls. One morning, he showed up at Kelly's, clean-shaven and in a suit. "Where are you going?" Kelly gasped. "I got a job," proudly replied Kevin. "One of my friends offered me a job with a rich family, to accompany the child to school, to pick him up from school. I'll drive him around." "Kelly, would you have seen that car? It's a Dream, the latest model." Kelly didn't know much about car brands, so it didn't make a big impression on her, but she was so happy. Finally, the black streak in their lives was over. Now Kevin would get a grip on his head and everything would be fine. Also, the kid's mother found out I was a soccer player and asked me to tutor her son. Not for free, of course. "Anyway, Kelly, we're gonna make a life, you and me," Kevin said, and then laughing happily, he picked Kelly up and took her for a spin. And she laughed. Now they'll be healed. But Kathy, when she called her friend to see how she was doing, didn't share her joy. You should find out who this family is, what the guy does for a living, what his wife looks like. Or look, this employer with your husband. Kathy warned me. "Nonsense, you say." Kelly dismissed it. She didn't even think it was possible. After 2 months, Kelly noticed that Kevin was coming home later and later. One night he didn't come home at all, and the next evening he showed up smelling of women's perfume. Kelly found traces of lipstick on his shirt, and she made a huge scene. Screaming, crying, blaming her husband, and he looked at her with a grin. "You chicken." Finally he said, "Have you looked at yourself in the mirror long ago? When was the last time you were in the hairdresser? And what are you wearing? Have you ever heard of dresses? Always in the same jeans and stretchy sweatshirts." "I don't have time for salons." With resentment, Kelly said, "I've been working 2 jobs, and I'm still working 2 jobs. I don't see your paycheck. Okay, first, you said you had to dress appropriately. Then you had to get a bodyguard's license, also for a fee. Meanwhile, I was paying rent, buying groceries. Where's your paycheck? In a safe place. Kevin grinned cheekily. And it's none of your business. What do you mean? That's what I mean. Chicken, I'm leaving you. Kelly's eyes darkened when she heard that. No, it can't be. He's just telling her to spite her, because they love each other. You disgust me. Kevin said angrily, I'm in a relationship, and you should know who I'm in a relationship with. You'll never be like that. Jenna, she's wonderful. Jenna, who's that? The woman who hired me. What about her family? She has a son, a husband. No husband. He died a year ago, but Liam and I got along, and he doesn't mind calling me Dad. After Kevin said that, he started packing his things. Kelly sat silently watching. There were no more tears. The man she loved so much, the one she would turn herself inside out for, had betrayed her in such a despicable way. Kevin, as if nothing had happened, was rummaging through his closet. His cell phone rang. Yes, honey. Yeah, I talked to her. He said cheerfully into the receiver and looked at Kelly with a sneer. It's okay, come on over. Kelly felt as if she had been punched in the face by those words. She jumped up and started to push Kevin out of the apartment, and he only laughed. Kelly, you're a loser, he said to her already on the doorstep, slinging his bag over his shoulder. You realize life is a game, and you'll always be on the losing side. Go away already, Kelly whispered helplessly. I can't see you anymore. And life will put everything in its place. Let's see which one of us loses. Kevin laughed and walked out, slamming the door. Kelly slid down the wall and howled like a wounded wolf. She didn't go to work in the morning. She called in sick. She was indeed sick. Her soul ached from the betrayal of her loved one. All day she lay on the couch, curled up, and in the evening the doorbell rang. Kevin's back. He's changed his mind. She would forgive him. Kelly jumped up from the couch, but Kathy was there. Hello, friend, Kathy said cheerfully. Why do you look so bad? Are you sick? And why is your cell phone unavailable? I've been calling. I was worried about you. Must be dead. Kelly remembered and hurried to turn her phone back on. What if Kevin called? But no, he didn't. Tell me about it. Kathy didn't ask, she demanded, and then Kelly burst into tears. She sobbed. She fell on her friend's shoulder and talked, while Kathy listened and grew more and more gloomy. What a bastard, she said when she found out. I always knew he was a bastard. I didn't like him, but on the other hand, it's a good thing I did. Kelly, imagine if you had a child. How much worse would that be? Kathy, I kind of am. Kelly sobbed. What? Are you pregnant or something? Kathy exclaimed. Kelly just nodded. She'd been meaning to tell Kevin, but she'd been putting it off, waiting for the right opportunity, and it hadn't presented itself. Don't tell him, Kathy advised. Find a good doctor. He'll do it, and you'll forget the whole story like a bad dream. No doctor, whispered Kelly. Kathy, I can't do this. Why not? Can you imagine being alone with a baby? I do, 'cause my mom raised me alone too. I can do it. Kathy, I was up all night tonight thinking. You know, this baby is a part of me. It's like taking a piece of my heart. I can't do it. Well, then we gotta get this creep back into the family. We have to tell him about the baby. That's not necessary. Kathy, I thought he was coming back tonight. I mean, we had a fight. He'd make something up out of anger. But he didn't. I'm looking at his face right now before he left. Kathy, he's happy with someone else. He doesn't need me or the baby. We'll see about that. Kathy was angry. No, this creep is going to enjoy his life, and you're here with his baby. You can't do that. At least let him pay child support. In vain, Kelly asked Kathy not to tell Kevin about the baby. She found him anyway and told him everything. They met at the coffee shop. What does she want from me? Kevin shrugged. I'm not sure it's my baby at all. Who was she hanging around her store with? Anyway, if she thinks I'm going to pay her child support, she's wrong. She's not getting a dime from me. I'll prove the baby's not mine. But it's your baby. I'll prove it's not mine. Kevin grinned cheekily. At that time, a spectacular blonde girl, a little older than Kevin, and a boy of about 10 years old came to the table. Honey, here we are. The woman smiled. Lunch? Yes, Jenna, of course. Kevin smiled eagerly. He jumped up from his seat, helping the woman sit down, then sat the boy down. Tousled his hair affectionately, and he smiled back. What an idyll. Kathy couldn't stand it any longer and stood up. Are you aware, dear Jenna, that your Kevin is about to become a father? Jenna, don't listen. Kelly's making it up. Kevin started to justify himself. Jenna grimaced and looked squeamishly at Kathy. I realize you're a friend of Kelly's, so give her some friendly advice about terminating the pregnancy and staying out of our family. Kevin and I are a family. We've already filed the divorce papers with your Kelly. Kathy smirked. Aha. She said nothing more and walked away from the ugly couple and the spoiled boy who sat with his feet up on a neighbor's chair. How to help her friend? Kathy decided not to say anything to her about the meeting at the cafe, so as not to upset Kelly further. At first, Kelly felt as if her soul had been ripped out of her, but gradually she began to come to her senses, and even the divorce went completely calm. And she didn't say anything about the pregnancy. Out of pride. Kevin didn't ask. He wasn't interested in Kelly's problems now. He had a new love. And Kelly lived in a modest rented apartment. She worked at the store. In due time went on maternity leave, and until the birth continued to work with her students on online courses. The labor began suddenly, rapidly, at night. She just got up from her desk, turning off her laptop as her stomach contracted sharply. She reached for the phone with her last strength. Why did you take so long? The paramedic in the ambulance told her off on the way to the hospital. You should have been hospitalized a week ago. I couldn't. Squirming in pain, Kelly said, I have a job. Everybody's got work, sighed the paramedic. And you need to think about you and the baby right now. It's gonna be okay, Mommy. Don't worry. My son was born healthy. Dark-haired, like Kelly, Kevin's blonde. If he looks like his mommy, he'll be happy, said the nurse as she brought the baby in for his first feeding. You have a good boy. My boy, Kelly said fondly and cried. Why are you crying? You should be happy. Others dream of such happiness for years. I understand, but I'm scared. He and I are the only ones in this world. You have each other, and that's the main thing. While he's little, you'll take care of him, and when he grows up, your son will be your protector. That's right, a protector. Kelly smiled through her tears and cuddled her baby boy. She would do anything to make her baby happy. From the hospital, Kelly and Robert were picked up by Kathy and Miranda. They got ready, bought presents, and helped with everything at first. And then Kathy arrived one day confused. Kelly, I need to have a serious talk with you. What's wrong? Kelly's scared. I'm getting married. Why are you saying that like you've been hit with a bag? Dude, congratulations. Yeah, thanks, but I'm leaving. Noah's from out of town. He's got his own chain of body shops. So I've made up my mind. But that's great. Kathy, I hope you'll be happy. Yeah, he's a good guy, but I'm worried about you. You're on your own. My auntie went south too, married a southerner, sold her business, and doesn't seem to regret it. That's how fast she did it. She sends her love. Kelly, how are you gonna be all alone? Of course, Kelly was a little confused. She's used to Kathy helping her out, looking after Robert, Miranda dropping in occasionally. Now she's on her own, but Miranda and Kathy have their own lives to manage. I can manage. She nodded confidently. Don't worry about me, be happy. But we'll call you, even visit you when we can. Of course, friend. And they hugged goodbye, even cried. But we have to move on. Until the age of 1.5 years, Robert, Kelly somehow managed to make ends meet, and then from the state payments were very meager. And the courses she'd been working part-time had all but died out. There wasn't enough money for food. It all went to rent. Kelly thought about working, but she couldn't go out to the store yet. Robert had no one to leave him with. The nursery school waiting list was so long that it would be 2 more years. One day she saw an ad on a bus stop that a real estate company needed a sticker. Figured, there is obviously no rigid schedule, decided to call. Here's 1,000 flyers. Handed to her in the office of the girl administrator. For 5 days you need to go around the streets that will be on your list and paste ads. For this you will receive $20. Keep in mind that your work will be checked. The money was not much, but Kelly agreed. At least Robert would have enough for milk and cottage cheese. So she started working as a poster girl. She would get up early in the morning while Robert was sleeping and run around the neighborhood with glue and flyers. It was good where there were special boards for announcements on the entrances, but more often she had to paste them directly on the walls. Often she heard so many nasty things about herself because she was dirtying the walls. Kelly had a plan or she wouldn't get paid. One time they even let the dog loose on her. Good thing the dog was smarter than his owners. A huge Rottweiler ran up to Kelly, who was white with fear, hugged her and moved away. Oh, get out of here and don't come here again, shouted the man, the owner of the dog, as Kelly then cried on her way home, not out of fear for herself, but out of resentment. Why are people so mean? And then the minute the dog attacked her, it went through her mind. What about Robert? He's alone, he'll wake up soon. And after lunch, Kelly went to work with a baby, and there was also enough negativity. Although in the form of a child, people reacted softer. Sometimes they even helped me put a better sticker on the paper. Yes, people are different. There were also understanding. In the evening, having fed and put her son to bed, Kelly sat by the window and thought when everything would change in her life and whether it would change. Robert was already growing out of his stuff. Good thing Kathy had sent some new suits. At least she had something to wear out. By the way, Kelly didn't complain to her friend. She said that everything with Robert was fine, but in reality it was otherwise. One day, her part-time job on the internet completely stalled. The money from the stickers went to food. The doorbell rang. Hello, darling. In the hallway stepped a full lady of about 50 years, the owner of the apartment. I thought I'd drop by and see how you were doing. Kelly was confused when she saw the landlady. She hadn't been here since she and Kevin had rented the apartment. Kelly had been making regular payments on her credit card. Evelyn, this is so unexpected, mumbled the young mother. Yeah, we're fine. We're fine. The neighbors told me that you live alone now. You have a child. Did your fool leave you? I knew he was unreliable. Anyway, that's not what I'm talking about. Kelly, I'm giving you a raise this month. Don't get me wrong. Everything's getting more expensive, and I haven't raised the price in almost 3 years, and I have expenses. I bought a car, and it's eating up so much money. How much? Kelly blurted out. How much what the car costs? Oh, the rent. I'm not being pushy. I know you have a kid, but I'm raising the price by $5,000. If you don't like it, you can move out now. I've already got someone who's willing to pay my price. Where am I going to go? Barely holding back tears, Kelly replied, I'll pay. Good. Evelyn smiled. Okay, I'm off. So it's a deal. Kelly nodded. She had no other choice. But where would she get the money? And then, for the first time, she decided to call Kevin. She should tell him that he had a child. He was a father, Robert. He could help in some way. Kevin answered her call. A woman's laughter and a boy's laughter could be heard in the background. It was clear that Kevin was quite content with life. Need a hand? He hummed into the phone. I didn't talk you into having this baby. I thought you'd made up your mind. So you knew about the baby? Kelly was stunned. Yeah, your girlfriend came to me, appealed to my conscience. Why are you surprised? I told her then and I'll tell you again. I'm not sure it's my baby. It's interesting. You kept quiet all this time, and now you've suddenly decided to confess. Why would I do that? I'm just having a really hard time. I have no money. I have to pay the rent. Forgetting her pride, Kelly said with difficulty, You know, it's not my problem. You're on your own. And he hung up. Kelly sat there like a stone. Why did she call? She'd just ruined her own mood. And Kathy, she didn't say a word the whole time. I guess she just didn't want to upset her. Maybe Kathy should call Kathy, borrow from her, and then pay her back. No, her friend wouldn't say no, and she wouldn't demand it right away. But Kelly wouldn't feel comfortable. And what would she use to pay her back? And then Kelly remembered there was something that would save her and Robert. It's some earrings her mom gave her. Mom gave them to Kelly just before she left. She never wore them herself. Kelly didn't know they existed, and Mom kept them. Said Kelly's father gave them to her. They're very expensive. Maybe you'll need them when you have a daughter. Mom whispered and with a trembling hand pulled the earrings from somewhere in the nightstand and said they were diamonds. Kelly didn't believe it then, and she didn't believe it now. She thought they were just glass, but they were precious to her as a memory of her mom, and she never wore them, and neither did her mom. They lay in her notebook bag from university, in a simple box from under lollipops. What if they really were diamonds? The next day, out for a walk with Robert, in addition to glue and advertisements, Kelly grabbed the earrings. On the way, she stopped by a pawn shop with her son. Where did you get such a miracle? Surprised, exclaimed the appraiser, just looking at the jewelry and squinted suspiciously. Looking at the modestly dressed young mother and child, whose clothes were clearly already small. It was a gift from the late mom. Kelly replied calmly. It's easy to check, nodded the appraiser. For a long time he rummaged through his papers, then looked at the earrings. Finally he named a price and asked for a passport, almost $100,000. To Kelly, that was a lot of money. She immediately agreed to pawn them. Young lady, do you have any idea of their real value? Asked the appraiser while the documents were being drawn up. I don't know. Kelly admitted. All my life I thought they were plain, glass ones. Glass? The man laughed. Come on, I can see you really need the money. Yes, I'll throw in another $30,000, but no foreclosure. Do you agree? In principle, Kelly agreed to the first option, and she liked the second offer even more. It was just a little embarrassing. She was selling her mom's memory, but she had no other choice. and her mom would understand, and she'd never buy back those earrings. The money from the earring sale was a big help. Kelly immediately bought her son some new clothes, paid off a small utility debt, and put aside a few payments for Evelyn. The young woman realized that she couldn't be lavish, or it would be even harder, and soon she got a call from the education department. There was a vacancy in the nursery, and it was a pity to give the baby to the kindergarten, and he is not even 2 years old. But what to do? We have to live somehow. So Robert went to the nursery and Kelly went to work. Only very soon the store management started to grumble. The young mom took 2 sick days every month. Who's going to work? Soon they said they didn't want any problem employees. Well, I'm trying. Kelly justified herself. It's just that my son has recently gone to kindergarten. Children are all small, often get sick when in a new team until he is not used to it yet. How long do we have to wait for your son to get used to it? No one will pay for your sick days. Quit. That's the answer. It was no use arguing with the bosses. Kelly stayed at home for a couple months, scraping by on the internet, and mostly pulled a little bit from the untouchable reserve that was left from the earrings. We had to live on something. She didn't work as a poster girl anymore. When she went to the store, she gave it up. Now there were other workers there. They didn't need her. But one day, she got a call from the real estate office. Kelly, good afternoon. She heard the familiar voice of the receptionist, Adriana. We'd like to invite you to an interview for a vacancy. What position? Boss looked at your resume and was very surprised that a person with a higher education is quite literate. Worked for us as a poster boy. There's another offer for you. Would you like to try to work as a realtor? Yeah, I don't know. I never imagined myself in this role. It is not to sell buns and apartments, but the principle is the same. Adriana laughed. You have to praise your product, that's all. Well, will you come over? You know I have a small child. It will not interfere with your work. You can always arrange a time that's convenient for both parties. I convinced Adriana. The director of the real estate firm was Sebastian, an elderly man with serious health problems. He'd had a heart condition for years, and even surgery hadn't changed anything. All because he didn't have much desire to live. After his family, his wife, daughter, son-in-law, and grandson died in a plane crash 5 years ago. The only thing that kept him in this life was his work, the work of many years. He couldn't give it all up like that. That's why he was pulling it all on his shoulders. In principle, his office was not too famous in the city and could not compete with the big competitors, but it had its price too. Not so long ago, his realtor left for another firm, more successful. Sebastian was looking for a new candidate and decided to look at the resumes of those who were hired on a fixed-term contract. Interesting. He was surprised when he read the resume of Kelly, a young woman with a higher education. Why doesn't she get a job in her specialty? Yes, it's complicated. Adriana shrugged her shoulders, and she has a small child. Call her for sure. Sebastian, I repeat, she has a small child. So, call her. So Adriana called. Kelly arrived for the interview at 3 o'clock. Sebastian saw a very young woman, almost a girl, only very tired from everyday worries. He started the conversation from afar, asked about his son, about his studies, just about life. At the end of the conversation, he already roughly realized who was sitting in front of him. A simple little naive girl who got into a difficult life, but does not give up. Sebastian decided to give her a chance. He liked her, reminded him of his late daughter. Soon Kelly got a new job. Now she's a realtor. Of course, there were a lot of difficulties, had to learn a lot. At the same time, Robert was constantly sick, but the new team was sympathetic to this. And then Kelly was lucky. She was able to sell one apartment and the second one very favorably. Buyers like to communicate with a nice, pretty girl, while Kelly was not intrusive in her work, but at the same time was able to persuade, although about the shortcomings of apartments did not hide. This honesty was what brought her to the table. Sebastian, too, was glad he had hired this girl. Kelly did her best. Little by little, things got better between her and Robert. Now the young mother did not count the change, whether her son tomorrow will have enough for milk or not. They weren't lavish, but they weren't poor either, and then disaster struck. Sebastian collapsed in his office one morning and died immediately. His heart was failing. Kelly was very worried. She had become attached to her boss in a kindred way, and also worried about the question of what will happen to their office. The distant relative who inherited the firm was not at all interested in its development. It was a man far from business. He considered selling the firm a very troublesome business and postponed it for later. He decided to just appoint a business manager and himself to continue to live quietly, receiving dividends. He is not a young man, and why should he have these worries, business, competitors, inspections, and so on? What was Kelly's surprise when she was asked to be the manager? But I haven't worked here for a year yet. There are more experienced employees, she told Christopher, to which he showed her a letter written in Sebastian's hand. In it he, addressing Christopher, wrote that it would be right if the firm is not sold, and Sebastian would like to give a chance to the young but very capable girl Kelly. She would pull his case. It had been a few hours of waiting. Kelly had already started to doze off sitting in the car when she saw the man she needed. Michael was a very well-known man in town, in his late 40s, looking quite decent, a tall, sturdy, brown-haired man. Kelly knew he was single, but that information interested her the least. She was concerned that this man was difficult to negotiate with, but she had to at least try. Michael. She called out to the man, stepping decisively out of the car. "Excuse me, would you mind giving me a few minutes?" The man stopped and looked in surprise at the fragile brunette in a business suit. A confident look, a ringing voice, and eyes straight black, almost gypsy. Yes, Kelly had interested him at first only in appearance. No, he wasn't a ladies' man, but he noticed beautiful women. And afterwards, when they began to communicate on business, sitting in his office, Michael appreciated how smart this Kelly was. An unknown whether by her charm or her ability to persuade, but Kelly achieved that Michael's company signed a cooperation agreement with their firm. But it didn't stop there. One afternoon, Kelly's phone rang. It was Michael, and he asked Kelly out on a date. She gave it some thought and said yes. Why wouldn't she? She really liked Michael. They sat in the restaurant, talked. Michael told her about himself, that he was born in this city, grew up, studied, and even got married, but he and his wife separated after a year. They didn't have time to have a child. He's been working alone ever since. And you too, I understand, a businesswoman. Michael asked with a smile. No personal life. Kelly was just about to answer. The nanny called and excitedly informed her that Robert had a fever and the medication wasn't working. "I'll be right there." Kelly answered and looked at Michael. "You'll have to excuse me, my son is sick. I have to go right away. Why don't I give you a ride?" Michael responded immediately. He was a little surprised that such a young woman already had a son, so she had a husband. He wasn't happy about that, but his mood improved when Kelly told him that she had been raising her son alone since birth. "Now you're talking, businesswoman," she grinned. "I've worked as everything, haven't I? And cashier and salesman, even was a sticker to feed my son. But actually, I'm a teacher by profession. I see. Michael nodded. You know, life is like that. You go through a lot of things before you find your own. I wasn't originally a builder either. You won't believe it. I'm a telecommunicator by my first profession. When my wife left me, accusing me of not earning enough and all that, I was so hurt. I began to think and decide what to change in my life in the first place to prove to my wife. I built a small business with a friend, and we got with him in the 90s. We were able to rise. Now I have what I have. I don't know about my wife. She went somewhere in Siberia to her parents. I think she got married and lives in some village. To be honest, I haven't cared for a long time. So they learned a little more about each other along the way. At Kelly's house, they said goodbye and arranged to meet again. Robert turned out to be fine. The doctor from the ambulance suggested a trip to the clinic in the morning just to be on the safe side. That's all. You must have eaten a lot of ice cream? The doctor squinted slyly at the boy. Yes, there was a bucket in the freezer. I ate almost all of it. Robert lowered his head. Son, how could you do that? I told you not to eat too much, Kelly exclaimed and looked angrily at the nanny. Emily slammed her eyes shut in fright. I'm sorry. I didn't see it. Kelly just waved her hand. What can I do now? It would teach her not to buy buckets of ice cream. Michael called the next day and asked how Robert was feeling. Yes, he was fine. Kelly smiled into the phone. His throat is a little red, but he doesn't have a fever. But he had the ice cream of a lifetime. It happens. Michael laughed. I'm calling to invite you and your son to the park for the weekend. Robert will be well by the weekend, won't he? I think so. Kelly was a little embarrassed by Michael's suggestion, but at the same time she wanted to keep in touch with him, and not just for work. So of course she said yes. And that weekend the three of them were at the recreation park, riding the carousel, Robert jumping on the trampoline, riding his scooter. It was a warm summer evening. They sat at a table in a street cafe and ate barbecue with pleasure. Real men like meat. Michael winked at Robert. What's with the ice cream, right, Robert? Uh-huh. The boy replied contentedly. It's good. Why only men? Girls can eat meat too. Kelly joked. No arguments, maybe another portion, and Michael moved his plate. Kelly, smiling, took a bite, though she had more. Michael smiled too. How much did he like this sweet girl? Yes, she was younger than him by a whole 10 years, even a little more, but he was easy and simple with her, straight native. And Kelly felt, for the first time in years, that she had a man by her side. And late that night, as Michael carried the sleeping Robert home to Kelly's house, the boy suddenly woke up and wrapped his arms around the man's neck. Feverishly, he whispered in her ear, Uncle Michael, be my daddy. Kelly was close by and heard everything. She blushed as red as a cancer. Michael smiled embarrassedly. Go to sleep, son. Suddenly, he whispered and gently laid the boy on the couch. And then they sat in the living room for a long time, not knowing what to say to each other. Each had his own past offenses and disappointments, and each was afraid to be burned again. But they were drawn to each other. No more than that. They felt each other, every fiber of their being. Kelly, Michael finally spoke. I know you've been hurt in the past, and you're afraid of something like this happening again, but I can't help myself. I close my eyes and I see you. I hear your voice. I want to be with you, to love you. I want Robert to call me Daddy. I want to go fishing with him, to the woods, to play soccer with him. Not soccer. Kelly smiled sadly, and then she smiled cheerfully. Let it be tennis or volleyball, or at least checkers. Whatever you say." And Michael hugged her and stayed in their house until morning. And in the morning, when Kelly woke up, she didn't find Michael around and was very upset. Oh, stupid! She berated herself. She knew she couldn't trust men. And still she had stepped on the same rake again. He left, got what he wanted and left. She was so hurt that she cried. And then Robert and Michael came into the room. "And here we were making breakfast with Robert," said Michael. "Why are you crying?" "No, I'm just crying." Kelly quickly wiped away her tears and smiled. "What about my housekeeper?" "I gave her the day off." "You don't mind a little housekeeping, do you?" "I just want it to be just the three of us tonight." "Come on, we're making pancakes. Right, Robert?" "Yes, Dad." Robert replied happily and jumped into bed with Kelly. "Mommy, I'm so happy today." And the boy clung to his mother, and Kelly stroked his head in confusion. Yes, she had always realized that her son lacked a father's love, but she had not expected that Robert would accept so immediately. Maybe the boy had just reached out of naivete. No, he's a very cautious child. He just felt Michael as his soulmate. And just like that, Michael came into their lives. A month later, Kelly and Michael were married. It was a big wedding. Famous people of the city had fun at the wedding. The local newspapers covered it. Kathy and Miranda were at the wedding, both with their husbands, and Miranda had a belly. Just a week after the wedding, Kelly got a call from an unknown number. "Good afternoon. My name is Charles." The man introduced himself. "Kelly, I read about you in the papers. Who are you?" Kelly was surprised. "The thing is, I recently found something that I gave to my favorite girl, Camille, a long time ago." "You know Camille? That's my mom. She's no longer with us. How sad." "I don't understand." "What are you talking about?" "The diamond earrings." "Kelly, let's meet you." "I need to talk to you." Kelly agreed, but she went to the meeting with Michael. What this man wanted, she didn't fully understand. But when they met at the cafe, it suddenly became clear. Kelly was facing her father. The resemblance was uncanny. Yes, Charles was already over 50, his hair touched with gray, but his features, his eyes. Yes, Kelly looked just like her father, and he looked at Kelly without taking his eyes off of her. "God, I can't believe it." Charles whispered, "Daughter, I don't know." Kelly was confused, too. They sat down at the table. After an awkward silence, Charles pulled out earrings. They were the same earrings that Kelly had sold at a pawn shop a few years ago. Thanks to them, she and her son had survived for a while. "Kelly, I see you recognize these earrings. I'm not going to ask why you sold them. I know it wasn't for the good. Just listen to my story," Charles said. He said that almost 30 years ago, he met a girl named Camille. They fell in love, but Charles' mom got involved. She was outraged that her son, a student of a prestigious university, got involved with a simple girl from the backwoods. Yes, Camille was not a stupid girl either. She studied at a pedagogical institute, but she'd had neither parents nor money. Why would Charles want such a bride? But Charles didn't listen to her. They even applied to the marriage building. And that's when Charles gave Camille a pair of earrings. This piece of jewelry had a story of its own. The fact is that the first husband of Charles's mother died when the son was not even a year old. Soon his mother married another man. Charles was though the first, but unloved son. He often lived with his grandmother, mother, and father for months at a time. So when he turned 18, his grandmother gave him earrings, the family jewel. It was actually customary in our family to give them to daughters-in-law, but I never liked your mom, honestly. Grandma confessed. So I procrastinated, and then my son died. So I've had the earrings all these years. I was waiting for you to get married, and then I'll give them to your wife. But I feel that I don't have long left, so I'm giving them to you now. You can give them to your sweetheart when you meet her. Soon Grandma was gone, and Charles kept the jewelry with him, never telling his mother. Then he met Camille and gave her the earrings. A month before the wedding, Charles had to go to a student conference in another city. When he returned, Camille was nowhere to be found. He looked for her, made inquiries, but nothing. It was later that he found out his mother had arranged it. Camille said he was marrying someone else, said some nasty things to her, and when Charles was looking for her, going to the police, the stepfather got involved. They didn't tell him where his Camille was. After the institute, Charles went on the party line, then got a job in the city administration. He married someone else. Charles didn't love her so much anymore, but she wasn't a bad girl either. Then his mother started to interfere again. That's when Charles had a fight with his mother once and for all. Only then she said that it was to her credit that Camille disappeared from his life. Charles decided that there was no point in looking for his beloved after so many years. He had a wife for a long time. Children never happened, but he and his wife lived normally and fought and reconciled. Everything happened. He just stopped communicating with his mother, although he still came sometimes to her house. The driver brought money and groceries. He couldn't abandon his mother, especially since his brother and sister lived far away. And recently he decided to make a gift to his wife Cindy, ordered a piece of jewelry, and there at the jeweler he saw those earrings. Their family value, the jeweler at first did not want to admit where he got this jewelry. Then he told him that he bought the earrings from a pawn shop in the city. Just in case, he even took the information about who deposited them in the pawn shop. That's how Charles found out about Kelly. Now he had no trouble finding out everything about the girl. It turned out that Kelly was the daughter of Camille. Charles learned, of course, that Camille had left the world. And then he saw the front page of the newspaper. And there was a picture that said that the previously unknown Kelly had married one of the richest businessmen in town. Charles immediately realized that his daughter was in the picture, and he saw her features. Yes, I immediately recognized the earrings that my mother gave me, admitted Kelly, having listened to the story. But it's still so unexpected, because my mother never told me anything about you. Camille was very proud. Charles sighed. I blame her and I blame you, Kelly. I know you've had a hard time in your life. It has been. Kelly nodded. But everything's great now. But I still can't believe you're my father. We should do a DNA test, and then there will be no doubt. Michael suggested. Kelly and Charles agreed with him. And 10 days later, the results came back. Yes, Kelly and Charles were related to each other. Charles introduced his daughter to his wife Cindy. The woman, who had never had children of her own, quickly found common ground with Kelly, befriended Robert. She took a liking to Michael. They became friends, and only one thought kept Kelly in suspense. The story Charles had told her about her mother reminded her very much of another story she had heard years ago on the driveway. The time when she had cried and didn't know where to go. One day, Kelly ventured to ask her father, "What is my grandmother's name?" "You never said her name. Was it Vanessa by any chance?" Charles stared at his daughter in surprise. How would she know? And Kelly told him the story of meeting an old woman and her bald cat. She still has that cat. My driver always freaks out when he sees it. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. Turns out we could have met a lot sooner. That's unbelievable. No, I can't believe it. I've been giving her money for all these years to do things in housekeepers, and she's been fooling young girls, but she's not doing it now. I hired her a housekeeper myself. Maybe it's another woman with a cat. Just a coincidence. Callie guessed. Well, let's not guess. Let's go. It's time for me to meet my mother. And it wasn't a coincidence. Same house, same entryway, apartment number 12. The door was opened by the same Vanessa. A little older, a little sadder, but she still had the same keen eyes. The same Tom in her arms, only older too. Charles, the woman gasped. Have you decided to visit your decrepit mother? You're not that old, Mom. Charles replied, but I've decided that it's time for us to put an end to this feud. Did you realize you were wrong? Vanessa threw her head back in victory. The cat in her arms meowed something sharp. I don't want to find out more about who was right and who was wrong. I just want you to meet your granddaughter. This is Kelly. The woman squinted her eyes. Callie looked at her grandmother with a smile. She had long ago forgiven her for all the wrongs she had done to her. Her own grandmother stood before her. I've seen you somewhere, Vanessa said, puzzled. Of course you have. Callie nodded. I bought the wrong vitamins for your Tom once. Vanessa froze at those words and then clutched at her heart. Yes, she remembered her lodger, who had run away from her so quickly. She was a stubborn girl like her father. Nothing happened to Vanessa. She was more playing. Though she was sincerely surprised that her son had a grown-up daughter. And most importantly, she already knew her. When Vanessa heard that Camille, the same Camille, was long gone, she thought for a while. She was silent for a long time, and then she said, I'm sorry, son. Perhaps I was wrong, and you, my granddaughter, forgive me. Charles hugged his mother. He had forgiven her long ago. They were family, and Kelly decided not to remember all the wrongs. We have to move on. Why touch old wounds? She introduced Vanessa to her family, and the old lady melted when she saw little Robert. Charles is small. She gave her verdict and kissed her great-grandson on the top of his head. Robert was delighted. He now had a daddy, a mommy, a grandmother and grandfather, a great-grandmother, and a bald cat. The boy immediately demanded that his mom buy him one. Oh, no, son. Callie laughed. Let me and Daddy get you a simple kitten. Why don't you like my Tom? Vanessa even took offense. I like him, but he's very unusual. Kelly confessed, and everyone laughed. Another year passed. Kelly and Michael were expecting a new addition to the family. Soon they would have another son. One day they were walking together in the park. Michael and Robert ran a little ahead on the path when suddenly someone called Kelly. She looked back, and it was Kevin sitting on a bench. Kelly hardly recognized him. Sloppily dressed, stubbled, clearly hungover. Hi, muffled, Kevin said and got up from the bench. I thought I was mistaken. I thought so too. Kelly replied, How are you? I'm fine, and you? Oh, it's all gone to shit. Jenna kicked me out, left me without a dime, and now I'm living in an abandoned house on the edge of town. Robert came running up to Kelly. Is that my son? Kevin's eyes lit up. No, that's my son, replied for Kelly Michael, who also came up behind the child and realized who was talking to his wife. Yes, I'm sorry, mumbled Kevin. I must have made a mistake. Kelly and Michael walked away, Robert leading the way down the path, Michael holding her hand gently. There was another life beating beneath her heart, and Kelly didn't want to look back. Yes, life, the game. Sometimes it feels like you've been defeated, destroyed, abandoned, but it only feels like that. It's only the first round. There's the rest of your life ahead of you, and it may happen that if you lose once, you win much more later.
subscribe, and click the bell.
Damn it. If the grandmother had heard such a dirty expression from the mouth of her pupil, she would have deprived her of sweets for a week and made her wash her mouth out with soap. But since Grandma was sound asleep at the late hour of 0 o'clock, Camille went unpunished, finally having stopped pacing her room. Exactly the beast of the cage called the garden. The young girl plumped down on the bed, complaining about the creaking, shell netted from the mushroom in a pile of plush John, and snuggled into his worn chocolate-colored fur. Silently she cried. How? But how could she have been so stupid? To fall so low? It wasn't her brain that obligingly suggested the flu, though. There's still time before the immediate fall, namely 21 o'clock 30 minutes. The exact time was suggested to her by the dial of the alarm clock, at which she cast a tear-stained glance. It was in that time frame that she was to report to the abominable. Impossible without a heart of the scoundrels. 2. It all happened 10 days ago. Camille was in the school library. She had just returned the books she had read and summoned the help of an elderly librarian who had been plagued by sciatica from the rainy weather. Samara had them shelved. Petty. There was a mocking voice over her shoulder and a school drill. Way rolled. Cooley turned around. Startled. Because of the height difference, she gave the owner of the voice with her nose somewhere in his chest. At armpit level. No, she said, abruptly, and through clenched teeth, she dropped her gaze. She looked bold and contemptuous. Stephen is the bully of the whole school, a bully and just the embodiment of all male vices. The distance between the boxes left no room for maneuvering. But Georgia, still out of the back, turned around, involuntarily slid sideways on his thigh, and standing on tiptoe, reached up. And just a little more and the book on the lives of the greatest ancient Greek philosophers would be in place. She decided that she would just ignore Stephen, not give him that pleasure. Grandmother, by the way, even in the mind forbade to swear, but granddaughter in the mind to do it to herself aloud. Because it was so, because life turned out to be so, that sometimes she felt emotion, and it was impossible to do anything about it. Camille repeated to herself that she did not care that he continued to stand. Behind him, he must be squinting mockingly, blue eyes so piercing it seemed he could see right through you. A rustling sound was heard. Stephen apparently scratched the back of his blonde head. What unseemly habit! And then he suddenly intercepted the book from her, yanked it out of her hand, and slid it back onto the shelf himself. I didn't ask for it. Before she could finish, she choked on air, because he immediately grasped her shoulders firmly and turned her around to face him, literally typing her back into the shelf. I need to talk to you. I have nothing to talk about. Unexpectedly for herself, menacingly raised her voice and immediately remembered where she was, went to a whisper, leave me alone. That's how it is. After all you've done, it's no different than teasing. He lowered his voice too. By the way, you've caused me so much damage. You're a firing squad. Calling everyone up to the director. Losses. Who could even come up with trading answers for tests? Businessman, Stephen snorted. You're a dishonest man. You're a liar. You tell me you're not a gentleman. His hand suddenly moved from the girl's round shoulder to her thin, tall neck. His fingers ran along the edge of the snow-white legs, the collar, the decorated dress, as if to feel and outline the contour of the collarbone. Is that what it is about you? You seem to dress like a grandmother and act like one. What are you doing? The girl whispered. Her voice was quiet, barely audible. No longer out of habit of observing the rules of the library, but out of a strange numbness that spread through her body from the places Stephen touched. He grinned, but with only his lips. His eyes were cold. Nothing to do. He pulled away, took a step to the side. And so there was finally some distance between them, an obsession that had subsided. Nothing to do. Camille gasped for air. Stephen stood with his hands in the pockets of his jeans, on top of a t-shirt with some soccer club insignia and a black jacket. Dry, clearly 2 sizes too big. Despite his tall height of almost 190 centimeters, the guy was not very broad in the shoulders, and was terribly self-conscious about it. But he kept it a secret, of course. Stephen was the storm of the school, elusive and yet a known bully in the neighborhood, but on his half. He was also a repeat offender with a history of being held back in 3rd, 6th, and 8th grades. It was hard to know what was the ugly truth about him, and what was a scary rumor. But in any case, it would be hard to find a person more opposite in qualities and peculiarities noticeable at first sight in comparison with Sophia. And she, like him this spring, turned 18 years old at the very beginning of the season, when the first drop just appeared from the roof. Except that while Stephen looked all of 20, Camille was considerably younger than her age. The principal, the vice principal, handed out in the cafeteria, and some other people cringed at that. They loved to compare them. That's how unlike a schoolgirl is to her peers. Camille's grandmother, Emily, who for 10 years had also been her guardian after the death of her parents, who died in a car accident, and her only relative in the world, took care of her. Two people from very different eras inhabited the 3-bedroom Stalin apartment. In her working past, Emily taught history and literature. For almost 30 years, she had lived in the far north. Her pension was decent. She had enough to live on, as they call it. However, an outside observer could decide that the life of the grandmother and her granddaughter was peculiar, if not to say very strange. Camille received an exceptionally strict upbringing at home. Grandmother had no doubt that the modern world cannot trust a child. Overmullet, young, stupid creature will destroy the soul, morality, cripple, future. Emily herself kept to herself. She socialized only with a few worthy, in her opinion, people around her age. And if there was someone who had the audacity to say that she treated the child wrongly, that person received such an angry, logically constructed, and reasoned response that he himself was to blame, and in general shame on his head. And in time, the neighbors got used to it. After all, every family has its own rules. Everyone knows that. And since Emily's pupil was clean, clothed, and did not freeze, was always fed in winter, well behaved. Since Emily herself had a reputation for impeccability. For the last 50 years, then with time everyone calmed down, and even envied a little began to envy. After all, Emily had raised a granddaughter. So she's a golden girl. Not at all like the modern kids of the family unit. Just a little lady, not a girl. Until 5th grade. Camille was homeschooled, and then she went to school and became a white crow. Teachers, though, praised her diligence and gave her A's. One day, I only got a C for my essay on how I spent my summer. In it, a 6th grader described how she had spent the whole summer reading works on world economics and the history of capitalism. The teacher said that it was very informative, but I would like to know about personal, so to speak, life, impressions, and adventures. Were there only books all summer? Camille then boldly replied that her grandmother has an Alex Schwartz acquaintance. He has an anniversary. He is 90 years old, and he just wrote those very books on the history of capitalism. That's why it was necessary to read them all. And then, based on the results, so to speak, to write a poem and give it to the Jubilee. Everything else is in the background of such an important matter. Selfishness and vanity. If Camille had said this one-on-one, the teacher might not have been angry. But the confrontation happened in front of the whole class. The class burst into laughter, and the teacher gave the girl a C. That C made the girl sick. She got so hysterical, she ended up fainting. We had to call an ambulance. Naturally, the teacher replaced it with a B out of harm's way. But Camille spent a long time pining and telling everyone that she was a loser, since her essays had only gotten a measly C. But it wasn't just the specifics of her studies that made her stand out. She dressed very originally. Naturally, her grandmother was in charge of her closet. It consisted of good new things, except that they were made according to the fashion of the 30s of the last century, and that they were clothes are not the most fashionable dressy styles in that era. Shoes were also selected the most modest. Flat shoes were not a brand. Classmates grew up, became teenagers, young girls. They learned to use cosmetics, went for manicures, had their hair done. Camille couldn't afford any of that. Not that she didn't want to. Sometimes she thought her grandmother was too strict. But then she remembered that Emily had a weak heart and that life in the modern world was not sugared just because of such loose morals. And any rudiments of Charlie's rebellious sentiments were just wheat, without water, the heat of summer. However, Camille was not one of those dunces who can only be transformed by a beauty parlor. By adulthood, the girl's figure has acquired feminine, soft, and lush in the right places outlines. She had a slightly elongated face with high sharks, straight nose, and wide sensual mouth. Gray eyes dazed, black fluffy lashes, long brown hair no one had ever seen. Tucked otherwise in one of three hairstyles, 2 braids on the sides, 1 braid in the back, or 1 braid arranged in a wreath around her head. Add to that refined manners, shyness, modesty, and a habit of keeping in the shadows of everything bright, noisy, flashy, and modern. And also the fact that almost all her interests and daily activities filter only through her grandmother's opinion of whether it is worthy, whether it is decent. And if some meticulously outside observer were to analyze Camille's exactly outlandish exotic mess, he would easily find in everything the reason why those around her perceived her as a strange person. That's putting it mildly. And only in exceptional cases, such as in clashes with Stephen, who for the past 2 years had increasingly made her the object of his attacks. Light, but offensively barbed. Only on rare occasions did her usual calmness come off, and she began not that she would never be boorish, but would reply sharply and defend herself vigorously. "So you have nothing to do," Camille repeated. "Then go and study, you asshole, or help out in class 3. Someone broke a window. It's blowing. The kids need help." Aha. You're fast. Stephen has his usual smile on his face. "No, you're still acting like a grandmother and thinking the same thing. You know I've sorted out my problems, don't you? I'm not getting expelled. Thanks to Emily. She covered for me with our homeroom teacher. She realizes, if you give her the benefit of the doubt, that yes, Emily, she has 4 kids. She's a kind-hearted, fair person. You don't believe me. You want to bet on the test, and on Christopher will put 5, because his daddy brought her candy and something else. This guy was an incorrigible 2-timer, and no one in the class did not doubt that on the final test in math he will fail. Camille, of course, had heard of the couple, or rather, she had read about them. In some books, they were made by noblemen, and usually it didn't end well. There was no way she'd agree to some stupid bet. But today was not a good day at all. First thing in the morning, the grandmother thought her granddaughter had spritzed her granddaughter with cheap perfume. The girl swore that to grandmother's toilet stable did not go near, but she still made her go to the bathroom to wash off. Then it turned out that the grandmother just thought that in the closet there was a moth, so she put perfume in it. That's why Camille's clothes smelled. The grandmother didn't apologize, and her pupil felt unjustly offended. Then before school, she ran into a store to get tights. It was not a boutique, but a very modest youth clothing store. And this was where she and her grandmother sometimes came in when they needed to buy something that Emily had sewn but couldn't make at all. Usually it was something outerwear. This time one of the salesgirls didn't, as usual, just observe her from afar, but came up to her chest. The girl thought that she probably did so because her grandmother was not with her now, or she would never have dared to approach her. Grandma hated all sorts of consultants and knew how to drive them away quickly. The saleswoman talked about the fact that here our new products arrived. Youth clothes, very stylish denim skirts, and blouses beautiful. Camille glanced at it and turned away. No, even if she herself had been wearing what her grandmother sewed for 2 years now. There was no way she was going to upset her and dress differently. Pity, the girl sighed behind the back of the sales clerk, sharing with a colleague. What kind of savagery is this? How will she live when her grandmother is gone? Will be lost with such an attitude. Generally not adapted to life. No, she'll be left without an apartment or all those who beckon and where only the neighbor's teachers look It was hard, painful to hear that. And yet Camille couldn't help but recognize this woman as Evelyn. I saw the name on the counselor's name tags. She's got a point. It was really creepy to think about the time when she'd be alone. Grandma had been talking a lot lately about how she would soon be taken to heaven by her grandfather, and she, Camille, if she misbehaved, she would end her days on the panel. So to prevent that from happening, she must study hard, behave herself, and be a man of honor. What's the bet? Camille blurted out before she could even think about what she was doing. That's a different conversation. Stephen's voice had a sort of muzzled, jubilant edge to it. Let's say if you're right, and Christopher fails, I get the money back that I won in the cleanup card. Camille nodded. That would be very good, just wonderful. Because Borka was a third grader, from a large family, and he'd lost everything he'd saved in pocket money for 6 months, and I'll sign up as a volunteer and go to the city park to plant trees. And I'm not gonna swear. Yeah, I'm in. Wait, he suddenly grabbed her wrist. You didn't even ask what you'd owe if you lost. And what do you want? She opened her eyes with her wrist. How did the burn not hurt? The grip was barely noticeable. It was some other strange perception of his closeness. You agreed to the bet, did you? But I did. You know, I don't really follow you. I don't have to. But I remember you said something in literature class about keeping your word, something about honor. I did. The girl exhaled and tensed, getting ready to pull her arm out, which means you keep your word. And if you lose, you'll come where I say and spend the night with me. Why the squeaky armor? Theoretically, the guy was very clear. Except in my brain. It's like an automatic system kicked in. From the logical decoding of this phrase to spend the night. Why should I come to you for the night? But do not pretend that completely stupid. You understand everything, he said simply. And then he let her go, winked, and disappeared, as if dissolved among the racks. GRU was not left standing, barely breathing. You look in front of you. Oh no. What's going to happen to her now? How could she? How dare he? The girl clapped heavily. Was Stephen not enough of the atrocities he was doing? Why is he with her? For what? Here. And where a librarian appeared in the aisle. Having instructed the polite girl to arrange the books, she lined up for a Michko to drink tea. Oh, why are you so pale? Have you put all the books away? What do you need on the list? Yes, everything, answered Camille. Her thoughts had wandered a long way from the library. Thank you. I don't need anything. And she left quite a bit. From the elderly librarian by the fact that she did not even say goodbye. And then the day of the test came. Christopher sat next to Camille, and she, gently peering, realized that he had not solved the problems and the essence of nonsense. Finally, everyone turned in their notebooks. Camille looked triumphantly at Stephen, who was sitting on the Kamchatka. She had no doubt that everything would be as it should be, that justice would prevail. He would lose, would he keep his word to her, would be forced to take the path of correction. Let him promise everything just to annoy her. But in the end, it will all come back to him in a positive way. It will. I mean, it can't be any other way. And then we learned that Christopher got an A. And that's when I really wanted to go under. Stephen found her, or rather caught her just outside the school gates, just grew in front of her. So she bumped into him again. Hello. Hello, said the girl and lowered her head to the moon. What are we sad about? That it's not nice to lose, but it had to happen sometime. You can't live your whole life so right and perfect. You judge yourself. Step to the side. She tried to go around, but he wouldn't let her. So let's not get into any of your notions. Okay, we had a bet. Now you have to do what we agreed. You know, it's kind of funny, actually. If I were you, I'd be anybody else. I'm sure another girl could send me far and wide. But you're not like that. You gave your word, so here you go. He held out a piece of paper. My father had a cottage in the suburbs. There's no one there now. I'm coming on Saturday night. You're not going to cry. Don't worry, I won't touch you. We'll have a great time. I'll buy you a barbecue. Camille opened her mouth to say that she couldn't come anywhere, because how could she possibly explain her grandmother's absence at night? She didn't even have any girlfriends she could theoretically spend the night with. But she didn't say anything, just bowed her head sluggishly again and wandered home. Stephen left the walls of the school with an ambivalent feeling. On the one hand, he had managed to achieve today what seemed to him to be unrealistic. On the other hand, he felt as if he had gotten dirty in something nasty and filthy. Camille was not like other girls, and for more than 1 year had been for him only an object of interested mocking observation. But then he began to notice things that the others did not see. How good she was always straight back haughtily, but not haughtily. And what a right word for her aristocratic head planting. This girl never gossiped about others, never brought a cheat sheet. It was clear that she didn't live an easy life, but no one heard her complain. She seemed to exist in her own closed, like a soap bubble world. At recess, she'd duck into a book and just go blank. And then one day she's walking by and notices Stephen's in a bad mood. And she threw something like, "No offense," she wouldn't understand. This phrase referred to a conversation Stephen had had about 10 minutes before with his geography teacher, who had reprimanded him in a scathing, yes, personal way, for not done homework, and did not want to listen to the fact that there was simply no time for it, because in the apartment at Stephen started renovation in the bathroom, and he could not refuse to help. In general, she always scolded her students harshly for everything. After her husband's salary, because as rumor had it, the lion's share of this salary he took away to his mistress. So she found someone to vent her anger on, and it was this statement of Camille Stephen that caught her. He did not ask for pity, and no one dared to tell him what to think and feel. He tried hitting her breasts in response, with taunts, but it had all been bypassed. He began to watch her more, and he himself didn't realize how it had turned into an obsession. Yes, that word seemed quite true to him. And Stephen didn't want to do anything about it. Why? After all, apparently, like so many other people, already had a certain idea of him. So why disappoint her? Even if he never had a chance to win her favor in kind. Well, so be it. But he'll get his. Camille was welcomed home. Familiar, adored Smell's grandmother boiled for a late lunch. Chicken noodle soup and fried pies of broken dough with black caviar. But before sitting down at the table at the very doorstep, Grandma questioned Camille about the grade her test was given at school. Only when she was satisfied with the answer did she tell her to fan out and wash her hands. Then they sat down to watch some old Musketeers movie on TV. Then Grandma, even though it was already 8:00 p.m., took the crystal out of the closet. "I didn't have time to get through the morning. But it's necessary to do nothing at least in the evening. Hands from labor will not fall off," she said, giving the pupil an apron without on the couch, which was not avoided by any homework. Then Emily went to bed. Camille found herself left to herself. On the dial, the hands were getting close to midnight, inexorably approaching the coming of Saturday. She drew in a gasp of air and threw herself on the bed, closing her eyes. What was she to do? To break his word can be, of course, but hardly for such unfortunate behavior. She will immediately catch karma boomerang. That is, the well-deserved retribution from fate that her grandmother is so fond of talking about. And for some reason Camille couldn't imagine what it would be like to exist afterwards. Not to mention that this very thing she'd signed up for menacingly, sat up abruptly on the bed, then paced the room. Then a curse burst from her lips. Camille was more and more inclined to tell her grandmother everything and let her scold, let her punish. But then there would be a chance to make up her mind. What to do now? Grandma won't leave away. We'll say that, of course, there can only be a negative answer here. Granddaughter. The voice of an old woman in the corridor sounded. The girl flinched. Why is Grandma awake? She can't read minds. I think, granddaughter. Emily spoke in a hoarse voice. Granddaughter, repeated Emily in a hoarse, weak voice of the heart that she ceased call soon. The ambulance arrived on time. The doctor said it looked very much like an approaching heart attack and hospitalization was necessary. Camille was thrashing around, gathering the things she would need at the hospital as instructed by her grandmother. Emily was taken away. Camille returned to the apartment, locked the front door, sank down on the hallway banquette, and covered her face with her hands and sobbed. What a nightmare everything was turning out to be, just a black streak. And at the same time, it was impossible not to recognize that this misfortune allows her to carry out her plans. After all, the grandmother will spend a few days in the hospital, which means that the fact that the granddaughter did not spend the night at home will not become known to her. Frivolous books, erotic movies. This was not on the cultural and educational menu that the grandmother had prepared for Camille. Naturally, the young girl had some knowledge of the relationship between the sexes, and the school program introduced her to the fact that children are not found in cabbage. And yet the girl realized that if she thought about the fact that she had a little more to do, she would simply lose her feelings. Theoretically, of course, in this, there was a plus date canceled. But there was also a downside. She would essentially be betraying her habit of being an honest person. Like today, you lied about being sick of the cutlet, and then you threw them away. My grandmother once reprimanded her, and for some reason that incident was particularly sharp in George's memory. And tomorrow the grandmother narrowed her eyebrows and slapped the very missing cutlets in front of the pupil. Are you going to steal? Or will you run over a man with a car? Yes, on a green light. Grandma, forgive me, please. Choking on tears, asked little Camille, you will not make me finish them. They were in the garbage pails. How smart are you? Emily stroked the girl's head and then grabbed her ear and pulled her from the table. Take them out and give them to the stray cats that live in the basement. Put your hand straight up and throw it down. Grandma, from fear, the girl even stopped crying. We do not have cats living under the house. Only the rats are there. I don't want to. Too late, dear, grinned the old woman. You have to take responsibility for your actions. And if a rat bites your fingers, she said, touching each of the 5 fingers on her granddaughter's left hand, it's your own fault. I'm a sweetheart. I'm ready to love all kinds of you. Even if you were crooked in the face, even if you got D's in school. But if I knew you were lying, I'll know you don't keep your word. You're gonna lie to me one more time. That's how you're gonna get me in the coffin. You won't have a grandmother anymore. You'll go to an orphanage. I'll live off you. After that, 10-year-old Camille realized that she would always be an honest person and would not break her word. To go and give herself into the hands of a monster in human form. Camille chose her weekend most dressy dress, snow-white Richelieu fabric, skirt, sun and sleeves, wings. She blocked her hair with a dark green ribbon over the dress, a light green shade, the young green foliage of cashmere. She decided not to think about what would happen until it happened. She decided to take things one step at a time, gather herself and check that all electrical appliances were off, leave the apartment and from her home at the bus stop, take a bus to the station where the commuter trains leave from, get off the light version of the train. And she was a little confused, but she was given directions. It was to walk across a field. It wasn't scary. There were other people walking there. Some merry company, a grandmother, a vegetable gardener. They were singing songs and suddenly a strong young voice broke into their old chorus. The grandmother shared with an extraordinary companion, who was so young knew the words of an ancient Schlager, but immediately sang again. And so the whole company reached the dacha community. It was separated from a small village with the funny name of Jersey Pole, where in the old days they used to graze giant herds of cows, and now rare cattle kept by the locals. And a little farther to the south, the village and dachas were described by the river. In the heat of the summer months, it dries up almost to the bottom. Who are you, sweetheart? Asked one of the old ladies. Yes, that one staggered off. Acquaintances asked to get something, and she waved her hand in the direction of generally towards the forest, not houses. Well, happily ever after, the old lady said. Figured the girl didn't want to talk about herself. That's fine. Stephen's cottage turned out to be, and indeed, almost by the forest, stood on the very edge of the community, and it looked pretty abandoned. Camille looks like that. What a place to pick for a date. He couldn't ask her home either. She knew he didn't live alone. He was being raised by some distant relative. After Stephen's father was imprisoned for another theft a few years ago, Camille also knew that the boy's father had passed away last year. Then she sympathized with him and even tried to get close to him, to comfort him somehow. A man's grief. Maybe he'd realized her attention then. Wrong. He was imagining things. By evening, it was noticeably colder, and the girl chose her clothes according to the weather lunchtime. Still sunny and warm. But now it turned out not to matter at all. The fact that the body crept shivering. What was frightening was something else entirely. Finally, it was on the porch and knocked on the door. "Hello," he said, and a look of amazement flashed across his face, as if he was sure she wasn't coming. "Hi," she said, and thought that awkward mutual greetings like this were becoming a habit. And the group didn't want to make any habits with this guy. "Come in." He stepped aside, letting her into the house. The girl froze slowly, as if there was something nightmarish waiting for her beyond the threshold. However, that was essentially what it was. Inside, the house was just as she had expected it to be. It was in need of repair and cleaning. The furniture had been brought in on the principle that it was worthless. The floors were painted a luscious orange. Camille remembered that the same floors had been in her grandmother's village house. She'd only been there a few times, and then Granny had sold it. She didn't have the energy to travel to keep everything in order, and it was too far away to be used as a summer house. But the main reason for getting rid of the ancestral nest was that she needed money for her Camille nurturing. That's the word nurturing Grandma used. By the way, when she wanted to reproach her granddaughter, say, "I spend so much effort, you nurture, and you still manage to just shrink in winter, tear a new dress for walks, refuse to drink fish oil for immunity, do not remove. You put toys." The list of reasons for reproaches was endless, and only having grown up, or rather in 15 years, Camille began to think about the fact that not everything was her fault. Just sometimes her grandmother needed a fight, and the person with whom it could be done at will. She was the only one who could do it. "So, do you want a drink?" Stephen threw awkwardly as he led the girl into the back of the house. "I don't drink." She dropped it and rolled on him warily. "No, I don't. I'm already aware of that. I'm asking about tea. No coffee. No, I'm not asking for that. And you can." And Nastya got the purse handles first, so we switched knuckles. "I know I lost the bet, and I keep my word. I'm ready, but can you hurry it up?" The last word she threw at him angrily, determined to cross the distance between them. She stood close again, and he could almost feel her breath. So Stephen stared, dumbfounded. "I realize I have quite a reputation, but why were you pouncing on me? What was the courtesan used to call these girls of such behavior? You see, it turns out we can speak the same language," and he smirked. "Okay, that was an unfortunate comparison. I'm sorry, but what do you think? I jumped on you like a barbarian right here on the doorstep, threatening you without answering anything." Stephen sighed strangely and stepped back, shoving his hands into the pockets of his jeans. It was gloomy in this part of the cottage. The light poured in from the open door on the right, and there were two of them. The long hallway was junked. The living room was junked, or rather the living room was junked, because in principle there could not be a living room in the cottage. Camille was more inclined to the latter, if to take into account the fireplace, which, apparently, had not been heated for 100 years. It was so dusty with some kind of garbage inside, but she was much more interested in Stephen than in the surroundings. On the way here, her mind was drawing the most fantastic, disgusting pictures, and she imagined being at the mercy of a cynical, immoral scumbag. But for some reason it seemed that now she was just a boy who wanted to seem tough, like the bad guys in action movies, but he's desperately afraid of it. So you're shivering and you're gonna sneeze tomorrow. Apparently, the prolonged silence in which they froze like two exhibits in an abandoned museum began to irritate him. Come on, I'll put the tea on. Camille doomedly sank down next. What's all this for? What's to make me tea? It's logical, because you touched it. What does it matter if you're going to? What are you doing? A girl ran in. When Stephen pulled her sweater over her head, the guy froze. I rounded my eyes. She took a step back and still had her back against the wall and held her purse out in front of her in a desperate protective gesture. No, please, I'm not ready. A moment later, a scratchy woolen article of clothing flew into her face. Stupid. Hold it. It's cold to look at. Stephen, who remained in a t-shirt, turned his back to her and began to work on the gas stove. Put them on. I'm not peeking. The desire for warmth outweighed the embarrassment of using someone else's clothes, much less a man's, and Camille, tangling in the sleeves, pulled the sweater on. Thank you, she said quietly. So it's unlikely he heard. You know, I'm really surprised you came just to do a word of honor. It's kind of old-fashioned these days. I can't do otherwise, I shrugged, sitting down at the table. And if I were to argue something similar, like stealing something, it would never happen. Camille said smugly. Aha, so it's still within your moral framework. A teapot and a couple of cups were placed on the table. All three items clearly belonged to different services. That's not what I meant to say, the girl muttered. You cheated at all, caught me giving my word before I knew the terms. When he filled the cup, she put her palms around it. Though it was scary, hot, her body desperately needed to finally get a dose of warmth. Okay, I give up. I'm a scoundrel and a molester. But the end justified the means. He smiled and sat down next to me. There's nothing for tea, she asked timidly, suddenly realizing that her stomach protests against the empty drink and lunch and dinner for nervous thoughts, the ground as it was missed. There were chips and a chocolate bar, but I ate them while I was waiting for you. And the euros. Here's half a chocolate bar. He put the candy on the table. I see. For a while there was silence in the kitchen, where a lone light bulb shone, apart from the sounds of tea drinking. What was that? Was Camille suddenly alert? I didn't hear anything, Stephen said nonchalantly. Did I hear something that made you think there was someone else in the house? The girl went cold. No, you're lying. I'm not lying. There's no one here. The boy nodded at the doorway. Beside him, a puppy, a well-fed little thing that looked like a street Bernard sheepdog, peered into the room. He wiggled his nose funny and shook his paw. The first out of lively young curiosity. The second, because the paw was occupied by a screw. Oh, he's so cute. Camille flew off her chair and was at the puppy's side in a flash. Grandma's strict upbringing included, among other rules, one that said no animals in my house, no dogs in the street. They'll chew them up. They'll freeze. Lock-a-me. The puppy was taken aside, but then attracted by the fact that the stranger was wearing a master-smelling sweater pitched forward. Where'd he come from? When I was on my way here, he came after me at the station. He must have hurt his paw in the street. I swallowed a little. You'll keep him, or else. I have the right now. Unhappily, Stephen grinned. He'll live at the dacha for now, of course. When I leave here on weekdays, so he'll stay with the neighbors. I've already made arrangements, and then I'll take it all to myself. I've decided to rent an apartment. I'm looking for options to bring him back to where I live now. I can't just throw him out on the street. Stephen whistled, calling the dog, but the girl didn't let him make a move. Picked him up in her arms, went back to the table, slightly pulled out a chair, sat down, and placed the puppy on her lap. Bilek stated a fact already known to the boy. Pretty as he was, he also reached out to pet him, and their fingers met in a thick laugh. And the laughter must have stayed on the train, because both of them felt a pang, a strange pulling sensation. Camille froze, eyes wide open, watching the guy's face grow closer. "How beautiful are you?" he whispered. The next moment their lips made contact. About the flu, I had read about the miracle of the first kiss. But she wasn't thinking yet how it could be hers, much less envisioning that it could be so dizzying. Like being dropped into the sky with this guy. And while the kiss lasted, she forgot all about the unhappiness with her grandmother, about the fact that he'd forced her into a terrible moral downfall, that she was entirely at his mercy. The kiss was interrupted for a trivial reason, and they realized they needed a breath of air. Immediately, the magic of the first intimacy vanished. Camille's hazy gaze was a dream. And now, instead of sweet tenderness, it read disgust and contempt. And Stephen in response immediately looked haughtily mockingly, so looks the winner on the coveted trophy, which has already managed to touch. And now the moment of total possession is at hand. "I hate it." The voice didn't waver. The puppy, as if sensing the mood of people, jumped from her lap. Master of the place informed him master and dog kneeled. Somewhere in the hallway, stupid name Camille was now ready to say anything to hurt him. Other more graceful and sturdy expressions. She was still going through her mind. "Didn't ask you," risked the guy, rising from the table. She shuffled out of her chair upward, weighed down, and did what all sorts of wilderness survival instructors advise against doing under any circumstances. Turned to the top predator in the house behind her back one moment, and he put his arms around her, turning her to face him, or rather, pulled her to him, so that the fragile girl's hands pressed against his chest. The forces were, of course, unequal, and he in an instant broke her resistance in the loins. The girl was jabbed from the edge of the steel, and she wrinkled her nose, which he interpreted to his own understanding. "A girl like you would never mess with someone like me. But still, you think I'd pass up a chance to at least give you a good kiss? Not a chance in hell." She was about to tell him everything she thought of him and his heartless wager, but only exhaled, clenched her eyes convulsively, realizing she was going to kiss again, and immediately opened her eyes. Hearing glass break somewhere nearby, Stephen heard it too, let go so sharply that Camille staggered. It was only because she clutched her fingers to the table to the point of pain that she did not fall that he cut the question short, pressing his finger to her lips. The girl was pierced with fear. It wasn't even a misunderstanding that something wrong was happening, but a pure underlying feeling. What might be called primitive intuition, for centuries guarding man from trouble. "Is there someone in the house?" whispered Stephen, and extinguished the light in the kitchen quietly. Now they heard together in the far room of what was on the other side of the living room, the hallway. Someone was treading heavily. More than one person, it seemed. "Damn it." Stephen sagged, and Camille glanced at him, wondering how, however, they could express themselves so similarly. The occasions, of course, were quite different. "Thieves are thieves," for the girl whispered. "That one has nothing to take, and usually climbs up to the cottages in winter," answered Stephen. And though it was almost dark, only the light of the moon slipped sparingly through the window. The girl could have sworn that he turned pale. "Gotta get away. Must be summoned," she said. "The telephone in that room," he muttered through his teeth and turned to her. "It's yours." Camille quietly took her purse from the table. "I opened it. I forgot it at home." Stephen waved his hand, whether to mean okay or not. "What an idiot. Go on. Get out. Call the neighbors from them." "And you asked the girl?" The young men were already in the front of the house, and those who had entered it in the middle of the night, judging from the sounds, moved from a room that could be called a bedroom. Beyond the door, a narrow bed was visible. There was a covered veranda adjoining it, and also playing the part of a huge closet. All this Stephen appraised briskly, pondering what to do next. The door to the second room was still open when Camille entered the cottage, and apparently the puppy had gone out of there. And it had even returned. "I'll get the master and come out too," the boy replied. "No, you can't do that." With an unconscious gesture, she grabbed his arm and pulled him. "Go already, fool." Shook her off him, and "Go already." Saying this, Stephen disappeared into the gloom of the room. Camille clasped his hands together. He is right. She should run and call for help. Why should she get in the way? After all, she hadn't come here of her own free will. And Stephen is not a good man at all. The girl went to the front door, opened it. Luckily, it didn't creak. It was brighter outside than in the house, and already from the porch you could see the warm light, the lights in the houses of neighbors. But at that moment there was a scream behind her. Camille rushed back and again, as if not realizing what she was doing, grabbed something from the stack of boxes, apparently prepared for taking out the change. Something heavy but comfortably lodged in the cramped palm of her hand approached the doorway. Grimly, she cautiously peered inside, and only by an incredible effort restrained herself from shrieking. Stephen was lying on the floor, with some scrawny type bent over him. His long arms frantically groped the guy, as if the legs of a giant spider made to taste his prey. "What is it?" A second type raised his voice. He was not visible at once, for he was standing at the other end of the room at the exit to the veranda. "Nothing," answered arm's length hoarsely, curled into a cough. "I guess Mio fooled us." "No way." The second type swayed. And Camille, continuing her observation, it seemed that they were both drunk. "It's got to be. The kid knows something for sure, but he's being sea-lynched. What do you want to knit with? Hold on. I'll look." Camille backed up so she was hidden by the wall. She didn't plan. She didn't wonder how big her chances were. She had almost ceased to realize herself, and there was only one aspiration left. One decision: she can't leave here. That's the way with these villains. The girl could almost physically feel the threat coming from them. They were apparently looking for something, but that was unimportant. The moment the arm-length, chain-linked man stepped into the antechamber of the living room, a cast-iron skillet fell upon him. The blow struck him squarely on the head, and most of the weight of the cast-iron utensil fell upon his shoulder. The stranger howled, then grunted and collapsed senseless. Camille, before anything else could react, Sama rushed into the room and just threw the skillet forward at random. She was lucky. Those who had entered the house had not expected to find anyone other than the boy son of their longtime debtor. So they were confused, but the second guy managed to dodge. He darted into the veranda. Frightened by the attack, he did not rush to the aid of his accomplice, because he did not know who else was here. Stephen moved and began to rise. Stephen ran. The girl rushed to him and suddenly jerked upward hard, helping him up. "I told you." The boy dropped his tongue behind his flying tongue and grimaced with pain. The blow of the bandit who had attacked earlier came in the jaw, and judging by the sensations, now it was impossible to do without a visit to the dentist. The villain, who opened on the veranda, had a flashlight with him. Its beam snatched the young men, and they turned around in sync. Accurately caught in the forest clearing by the light of the headlights, young Alyosha, "Ah," you foully swore and spat through his teeth, a man in the characteristic clothes of a prisoner. "The girl is still light. Where are you standing? Let's run, Camille. It's the end of you." And the convict took out from his belt something that glinted in the cold light of the moon like steel. They were separated by a few meters, 3 or 4 meters. Stephen came to his senses, and together with the girl, rushed to the exit of the room. He was not a coward, but he was not a fool to stay heroically in the house and engage in hand-to-hand combat. The puppy was yapping at his master's feet. He wasn't a coward either, but he was too young. And when they got into the house, he was just too scared. He scrambled under the one who cried his own way. And now, with 2 good acquaintances around at once, he took the risk of getting out. Camille took an extra couple of seconds to bend down and pick up the mala. "How you round your eyes?" Stephen, when they stepped over, or rather jumped over the louse on the floor of the convict. Such a thing he had not expected from his unwilling guest. But all questions could wait. Without collusion, and without wasting any more breath on superfluous words, young people with a puppy under their arm rushed out of the house and dashed across the lot to a neighbor's dacha. They didn't even turn around to see if they were being chased in. Ran out onto the porch for the door drums. Help. Call the police. Help. The events that followed merged into several long. Later we recall them as if through the fog of a clock. Alarmed neighbors came to the rescue. And soon those who had broken into Stephen's father's cottage in the middle of the night were captured. They were indeed, as Camille had immediately thought, escaped convicts. An ambulance and a doctor also arrived. After examining Stephen, he said that, in principle, it was nothing serious. The jaw was not broken. And that's the main thing. Young lady, you don't risk it anymore. The doctor turned to Camille alone on such a big guy with a frying pan. Dashing. But what if you'd missed? I can't imagine. What else was I supposed to do? Now that it was over, Camille couldn't stop shivering, even though she was drinking the second mug of scalding hot tea. And 2 woolen plaids, given out by surly, unworthy neighbors, were thrown on her shoulders at once. Stephen disobeyed and looked out still into the street, just when the very convict who attacked him biked to the police car. Too bad he had no time to fight back. Stephen spat on the ground and threatened the man with his fist. He swore at the police. Walking with his feet, he rushed into the fight again. But naturally, no one let him. Stephen heard a couple more nasty things about himself and his father. It's all clear, he muttered. He went back into the house and sat down at the table, leaning over his cup. Then he explained to Camille who it was. It turned out that 2 prisoners had escaped from the very colony where Stephen's father and his cottage were located. They didn't choose it at random. He liked to lie all his life, Stephen said. One could sense that he was both eager to speak out and uncomfortable with his own need for candor. And Georgia also noticed for the umpteenth time that Stephen calls his father he. But in principle, such an oddity was already familiar since the boy's parent went to the colony 4 years ago. Stephen almost never said either father or John. And here he lied, thinking it would add to his influence in the zone. Bitter. The young man grinned. He didn't keep quiet while he was still at home. He lied that there was gold buried in the dacha, which he stole back in the 90s. You can imagine, Stephen usually spoke about his father without emotion. But now, apparently, against the background of the experience, his intonation was combined with indignation. He lied to my little boy that there was gold in the garden. And I wasn't even then. I used to take a shovel and dig joyfully from fence to fence, from where I took strength. And he was laughing. So there's no gold? Camille asked. No, of course not. Yes, everyone was looking for it with metal detectors. About 10 years ago, they rented the summer house to some students. They heard all this nonsense and started to turn the place upside down, looking for it. And there was never any gold. It's that simple. He just couldn't accept that he was no longer the big bandit everyone feared, which he had once lost at cards. Mom left us back then. That's probably why he went completely off the rails. So he created the illusion that he had money. It's just not time to take it yet. What a bastard. Stephen raised his voice. Even before he died, he had time to shoot the whole psycho out there. How do I know that no one else will come here to this El Dorado on the outskirts? I'm fed up. I'm leaving. How are you leaving? Camille was confused. It was none of her business. And if she had the opportunity to go away and never see Stephen again in her life. But a little earlier, before this attack had happened, she would have gladly taken it, and would even have given much for such a gift of fate. But now she could not explain it to herself. She didn't want to get into the intricacies of her feelings, but she just suddenly realized that she cared about Stephen. It was discouraging, made her feel like a bad and spoiled girl. But Camille couldn't change that, even if she really wanted to. And you'll pass your exams. Stephen stretched out his hand and snapped his fingers in front of her nose. Wake up. What exams? What will this school give me? What about getting into the institute? She whispered. Woolen plaids. Would they slip off my shoulders? But the girl didn't even notice, declaring them cool. Aha, an institute like me is lost. Nothing in life is ours for the taking. Stephen averted his eyes. No, you're not missing. You don't have to be. It's not like you have to be like your father, or that you have to live your whole life miserable. You can be anything you want to be. Now Camille's voice sounded firm and determined, as if she had to speak to a large audience, such as her own class, and she had something very important to tell them. What do you know about me? Stephen said this in his usual mockingly arrogant tone, but in his eyes he read a different kind of loneliness and lostness, as if he were suddenly alone in the world. Camille knew, in fact, that he was. She could have sworn that this guy didn't have any really close friends, the kind you trust like yourself, the kind who wouldn't let you go to waste. And then a thought struck like lightning. She does. A grandmother is different. A family member. She replaced mom and dad. But it's still different, and she has no friends of her own. Are you right? She answered. And I know the rumors, and what you said yourself. And that's not much. It doesn't have to be more than that. Stephen rose abruptly from the table. Shall we? Can I call you a cab home? And what else? Robert, neighbor and owner of the cottage, intervened in the conversation. He wasn't eavesdropping on the conversation. It's just that he had his own business with Sprouts and in the next room, and he happened to overhear a lot of things. Robert had known Stephen for 3 years, that is, exactly since he had bought the plot. At first he had thought Stephen was a guy, and a felon without 5 minutes. That was how the distant relative of the young man, who had become his guardian, had put it. But then Robert changed his mind. If only because no one in the cottage community and the surrounding villages could not recall any bad deeds in which Stephen was involved. If only because this kid had been seen doing good deeds here and there. He'd helped fix up one grandmother's cattle shed. In the village, he helped to find lost cats of some townspeople who came to the country house for summer vacations. He participated in clearing the pond of all kinds of garbage, and even once tamed a local gang of hooligans when they started molesting the girls' daughters of the owners of the lost cat. All in all, Stephen, in Robert's opinion, was a great guy. He didn't really understand what Camille had to do with him, and decided that she must be his girlfriend. Romantic interest, so to speak. Let's have a show. These seats are enough betting. I'll give you all kinds of stuff. 2 seats. Now we'll arrange the youth. We'll have tea in the morning. Robert waved his hand. And then I'll give you both a ride to the station. It's a deal. Camille and Stephen nodded in agreement. That's how it was done. Glushenko. Finally, you're back. Rushed to the girl looked out of the apartment across the street neighbor. Good afternoon, Jenna. The girl smiled politely. Yes, I slept over at a friend's place. She had already prepared a lie about the fact that this friend had a small child, and she had to go to the night shift, and her husband too. And that's until she gets the schedules just right, looking for friends who will sit with the baby. But the next words of her neighbor almost made Camille faint. I got a call. I know your grandmother well. Jenna spoke quickly. The hospital called. They couldn't reach you. Oh, what a grief. She was in good health, wasn't she? What? What's wrong with Grandma? Camille was leaning against the wall in the driveway. I got the call. So the neighbor was in no hurry to get to the point. Anyway, Emily took a sudden turn for the worse during the night. The doctors were frantic. Oh, what a grief. You're all alone. The neighbor, the grandmother, stretched out. Grandma, she's dead. Camille's hand went to her neck. How hard is it to breathe? It felt like the sky was going to collapse on my head. Isn't it ridiculous just like that? Was she far away from her grandmother in her last hour? No. Why would you think that? Ooh, spit it out. The neighbor waved her hands. Don't you listen to me at all. What am I telling you? You're a fool. I said you're the only one left since Grandma went to the hospital. It must be hard for you to be alone. Anyway, by morning, she was feeling better. And I got another call. To say they'd never seen a patient recover so quickly. They said she'd be home in a week. Oh, why are you so pale? It's not even alive, Jenna. The girl shook her head and turned away, and began to jingle her keys, opening the door of her apartment. "You can't talk at all. The whole neighborhood doesn't like you for it." And she went into her apartment and slammed the door rudely, without even saying goodbye to her neighbor. Jenna stood there with her mouth open. Camille had never allowed herself anything like that before. "However," said the neighbor, and then, remembering that she had put in the queen chicken for soup, yes, put the fire on high. Ouch, poked and ran away to her room. Grandma was indeed soon discharged home, and the life of the small Camille family quickly returned to the usual course. But then it became clear that something was changing. Camille often thought of Stephen. They hadn't seen each other since they had parted at the station. The boy said he'd take the next train. In the meantime, he wanted to walk a little longer and think about everything. Sometimes, walking down the street, caught herself looking for him with her eyes. Why? She couldn't explain it clearly to herself, but she remembered what he had said at the station. Before the train started, he'd said he was very sorry for her and apologized for the idiotic bet. "I thought I'd feel better if I got you." It only made it worse. He didn't explain anything else, just disappeared. Camille once thought maybe she could find him herself, just go to his house. Maybe he hadn't moved out of his family's apartment yet, but every time he pulled himself away from such pointless stupidity. Then, as the train pulled away from Camille, Stephen gave her a look, then tugged the puppy's leash lightly. Went for a walk. He really had a lot to think about. Time after time he replayed the events of the previous evening, but not until the strangers broke into the house. When Georgia was still to come, Stephen could not find a place for himself. With his mind, he knew that he could triumph and get literally anything he wanted from her, except that his own recent impudence somehow began to seem like an unworthy dirty deed. And imagining what would happen when the girl crossed the threshold of the cottage, Stephen somehow could not in his own fantasies commit anything obscene. The most he imagined was a kiss, and this indecision, some silly modesty, only irritated him more. Then he belatedly also thought about the fact that, as promised then in the library, can tomorrow theoretically treat kebabs. Pork and marinade were standing in the fridge, but nothing. Now for evening tea, there's no such thing. It turned out quite invited the girl of his dreams cannot accept. The dog pulled sharply on the leash, thereby pulling Stephen out of his thoughts. "Ah, no," said the boy. "There's some geese grazing out there. Let's not go hunting them. Let's go in the grass over there. You little dog. It'll be like a jungle for you. Let's play." But even fun with Stephen's pet couldn't stop the thoughts from flowing. Only now they took a different direction. He suddenly remembered how many times his father had grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and, giving not fresh breath, said that they were of the same breed and that Stephen's destiny was to be a thief, a bandit, and that at 6, at 8, at 10 he had hated his father like that, fought him off, shouted that he would never do such abominations as he did, and his father would get furious and threaten to teach his son reason. And then growing up, Stephen began to realize that many people were not ready to listen to him about what he was like on his own. It turned out that many people perceived him as the son of the very thief John from some house. Stephen faced the fact that children were forbidden to play with him. He was looked down upon in the local stores, as if he was 12 years old and all he could think about was stealing. Distrust, contempt. Stephen responded to all of this with muffled resentment. And then other feelings came in. Stephen became hostile to the world. He did not want to be like his father, but he also realized that he was too often seen as a creature in John's shadow, as an extension of him. Stephen grew up a disobedient child. He realized early on that he didn't need to ask about his mother. It was enough for him to have one frank conversation with his father, who told him that she had left him for a new family, where the husband was all right and rich, and where other normal children had already been born. That was enough for Stephen to realize that his mother was gone, as if he was a half-orphan with a living parent. And then it happened that Stephen found an understanding with a group of guys who were considered the main bullies in the neighborhood. Somehow they got together, and it beckoned to him that these guys didn't suspect him of evil. They didn't bully him. Yes, they were not the ideal of virtue, real hooligans, but society with them beckoned. So he couldn't resist. Stephen, however, kept a little apart and did not participate in many of their scandalous antics. He was 16 when the leader of this kid gang said that they were not ready to be with them in everything. They don't need a man for one thing. Stephen stepped aside. Except the rumors about what a scumbag he was didn't go anywhere. They grew like mountain grass, and now he couldn't, and he didn't want to fight them. In fact, he decided it was probably better that they'd be more afraid of him, less likely to hurt him. And for a while it seemed normal to exist like that. But now Stephen wasn't so sure anymore. He was sickened to think that he had no other way but to follow the stereotypes around him. It was to the point of impossibility. Strangely enough, it was since he had started to get closer to Nina that he had been having these thoughts much more often. And after the events of that night, Stephen suddenly realized clearly he really could make his life anything he wanted it to be. It is only necessary to decide and quickly and definitively change everything. Despite the fact that final exams were approaching and free time had shrunk to the value of 0, Camille found a way to get a part-time job on Sundays. It was a lowly occupation handing out handbills to passers-by on the street, and it paid very little. But it was the very first money earned in the life of a young girl. After calculating the income for 2 weekends, Camille made a difficult decision. How scary was it? But it was too late to back out. It seemed to her that she was on her way to fulfillment. She was drawn by some unknown force that was impossible to resist. The first thing Camille did was to go to the pastry shop and choose a cake, a very small 1/2 kilo. But as the saleswoman assured her, it was homemade and delicious. It was a honey cake with a black currant layer. And then she walked into the mall to a familiar clothing store. Camille stopped with a frantic drinking heart at the racks, above which appealing plastic letters folded into discount words. "Can I help you with something?" Camille flinched as the girl counselor approached her. It was the slightly familiar Evelyn. For the first time in her life, Georgia felt so keenly that she looked wonderful. In an old-fashioned dress below the knee, she looked like a scarecrow to herself. "And I'd like to try this on," she said and pulled the shoulders of the dress. It was a smoke, someone's gray knee-high dress made of knit fabric with a couple of pockets. In front of it, Camille picked it out because it cost $49, and she had exactly $20 left after buying the cake. The consultant looked then at the dress, which was on unusual clientele, then at the dress, then at the shoulders. "You'll excuse me, but may I offer some advice?" She smiled timidly. "We have these leftovers from the last collection." And here, stepping back a step, she pointed to 4 mannequins who showed brightly colored sundresses made of cotton with flowers. "Accepted new collection. We just haven't had time to put these models on sale yet. If you want, I'll bring your size now." The counselor was very friendly. "One moment, please." Camille had no time to say not to worry, but the consultant disappeared and then reappeared. She was carrying 4 sundresses in different colors and in 2 sizes each. And right now, Camille simply did not have the strength to refuse. As soon as these marvelous outfits were in her hands, it was as if a witch's spell had fallen on the girl. As a result, she came out of the examples, clutching a sundress with large flowers of 4 shades to her chest. "A lovely choice that suits you very well," continued to Count Evelyn, who immediately escorted just glowing with happiness customer to the oblique, and the Ran S. escorted her partner into the depths of the hall to correct the clothes that had been unfolded all that day. Sam took it upon herself to count her out. "Thank you for helping me choose." Camille smiled. Her cheeks burned feverishly with a blush. "Thank you, Evelyn. Always happy to help update the look," she smiled back. What Camille didn't know was that Evelyn had already looked at her closely before approaching her and realized, because the girl had counted the bills several times, that the budget for the cover was quite tiny. Camille was not aware of the fact that the sundress she had chosen actually cost $250 with all the discounts. "So you owe exactly $50, the consultant said with a nonchalant look. Camille was already holding out the money, but her eyes fell on the cash register display. It showed the real price. Evelyn had hoped the girl wouldn't notice it, but Camille hesitated and looked uncomprehendingly. "It's the old price. The system knocked it down." She found it quickly. "Evelyn, that'll be $50. And seeing that the girl was slow, Evelyn herself collected the bill from her hands and also motioned to her across the counter, rustling a bag of clothes. "Take it, please, and thank you for the purchase." They exchanged a glance, and it was so quick, piercingly clear. Camille was bringing the package to herself, as if not believing in its material, tangible reality. "Thank you." And she walked out of the store. Before the girl who had performed the cashier's duties in the store that day returned to her seat, Evelyn had time to take out of her pocket the wallet that she simply did not risk ever leaving in the staff locker room of the mall, and put the missing $200 for the sold sundress into the cash register. If at those moments there was anyone who would ask her about the reason for such an act, she would not be able to clearly answer what moved her, but certainly not ordinary pity. She simply decided that it was the right thing to do. That it was the right thing to do. The thing was, it wasn't the first time Evelyn had seen Camille in this store or in town. They lived on the same street, and even their houses were close together, window to window. Evelyn was not a gossip, but if you didn't live as a recluse, you'd learn about a lot of your neighbors, and especially about the ones people said were strange. That's how you get to know them from afar, from the words of strangers. Evelyn was acquainted with Emily's grandmother and her granddaughter. Evelyn herself had been raised in a single-parent household by her grandparents. True, not because of orphanhood. Just parents were constantly on business trips or on hiking trips. In general, they lived their own separate from the native child, a rich life. But Evelyn's grandparents were quite modern people, and so for her Camille's upbringing seemed wild. But there was nothing to be done. Evelyn had been married for a long time. It was the 10th year of their marriage. It was a happy union. And in principle, her husband's income would have allowed her to be a housewife. But when son Kevin went to the first grade, Evelyn decided that she had enough of her recluse and got a job at this mall, especially since she'd always wanted a job that had something to do with clothes. Perhaps, Evelyn sometimes thought, it was something passed down from her grandmother, who had worked for almost 40 years. It was here in the clothing store that Evelyn had gotten the chance to get to know her grandmother and the flu, and on visits from an old lady and a teenage girl, who then turned into a young and beautiful girl. The whole store, as they call it, was painful to watch, because Emily, in her peculiar manner, now and then yanked her granddaughter. "Don't touch the tier. No, you will not wear that kind of work, and it's not made for you. Put it back. I don't spend the money, I decide what you wear." These were the phrases that accompanied their trips to the store for down jackets, seasonal, and other outerwear. The unhappy child was echoed by another salesgirl. And what will grow out of her with such a grandmother? Evelyn shook her head. She didn't know what to say. She felt guilty for some reason. They were strangers. It turned out that it was impossible to watch indifferently all these years as the grandmother grows her granddaughter, keeping her as from diapers in a cocoon of strange, frightening, giving a slight madness, care. Was this what Evelyn had done with the sundress? She suddenly realized that something special seemed to have happened in Camille's life, something immeasurably important that had motivated her to finally break the cocoon. Her grandmother said to Camille, "Let's have some tea." Back home, the girl hastily hid in her room and went to the kitchen, put the kettle on, put out tea pairs from a special ceremonial service, which in general, according to the rules, appeared on the table only on holidays, and on the calendar with magnetic bright squares. It was a very ordinary Sunday. "What's that?" The old lady frowned. "When did you make that speech?" "I didn't bake." The grandmother smiled at Camille and motioned her to the table. "I don't want you to be angry." "Okay, I decided on the weekend not to go out, not to the theater, and not to exhibitions to go to the library. I did a little work. And Camille told her mentor what she'd been doing. I just decided that soon I will finish school, and I need to get some experience, how to work. Emily sat down at the table, very distrustfully looked at the piece of cake, which her granddaughter put on her plate. Grandma, it's natural, and it's fresh, it's true. But it is not always possible only to bake cakes. Sometimes you can. And how much did you make? 100, answered Camille. How much does a cake cost? 50. Where's the rest of the money? I'm Camille. I'm starving. My high school asked me to take a photo for the prom. I just said the first thing that popped into my head. And when Granny looked up, aroused blue eyes squinting intently, Camille had no doubt in those moments. She would be exposed now. But here Emily nodded. It used to be customary for elders to be asked what to do. Oh, come on. What can I take from you? There's no work after school. Are you going to study? The old woman finally put off the dessert with a spoon and took a piece of cake to her mouth. Granddaughter held her breath. That'll do, said Emily, and did not utter another word during the tea party. And then she asked to measure her blood pressure and settled down on the sofa in front of the TV to watch a documentary about VDNK. The girl was happy that the cake was met favorably. The grandmother was simply amazed at her good attitude. After all, the last time Camille had brought her a store-bought cake to the hospital, she had thrown it out the window, screaming about how she wouldn't poison herself with palm oil. Maybe today's tea party is a sign of good things to come. Camille, housekeeper on trial, smiled at her thoughts. But then she remembered Stephen again. It seemed an eternity since that unimaginable incident at the cottage. And in all that time she had not seen Stephen. It was as if he had disappeared from her life altogether, vanished into thin air. The only thing that was certain was that he had dropped out of school after all. It was so little surprise to anyone, though. And the vice principal, not hesitating in expressions, prophesied to this bully the most terrible end, like his father. Camille did not agree with her and almost spoke out loud, but restrained herself, for it did not change anything. Who would believe her that Stephen was not really as horrible a person as everyone thought he was? Camille successfully passed her final exams, and finally, the big day of graduation arrived. Grandmother knew in advance that he would wear his granddaughter a dark blue velvet dress, which she once wore to the school graduation. Mom Camille this dress under the black silk sand now hung on her shoulders, on the door of the platinum closet. But yesterday's schoolgirl, getting ready for her main holiday now in front of the mirror, admiring herself in a very different outfit, that sundress with marvelous lush pink flowers. For the first time, Camille had not put her hair in a braid. Instead, she had twisted it into curls from the evening before. Logic, of course, was not at home, but she used an old folk trick, and the curls turned out with the help of ordinary socks. Granddaughter, what took you so long? Are you late? Camille flinched when she heard her grandmother, but the smile remained on her face, and she felt more confident than ever. And with another glance at herself in the mirror, she walked resolutely toward the door. Emily jerked back, and if she hadn't taken her heart pills this morning, she might have had a second heart attack. Because granddaughter, how did she look? Like she's not even her own. That's her Georgian. Grandma, I love you very much. The girl intercepted the old woman's hands, gently squeezed her cold fingers, wrinkles, and hands. But I won't go to my mom in that dress. I've bought myself a paycheck. I just can't live like this anymore. Grandma, it's not right. And so they stood opposite each other, the old generation and the young, the closest people to each other, who sometimes could almost read each other's thoughts, and at the same time very different people who belonged to different worlds. But here Emily, as noted, lips and chin trembled, eyes darkened, hands withdrew and sighed deeply, full chest. Exhaled through her teeth. Camille hid her hands behind her back, lowered her eyes. I won't be long, Grandma. I'll just get my diploma, take a picture with the guys in the park, and go home, Grandma. She took a timid step towards the door. I'll go." "Okay, go," Emily said unexpectedly calmly. "And don't be in a hurry. It's such a young thing." "Stop." She stopped when the girl opened the door to the landing. Emily opened the soap box. It was an old ceramic box with roses on the lid. The soap that had been stored in it almost 100 years ago was also scented with roses. Now it was used to store cash, with which people used to go to the store to buy groceries, pay for light, and so on. Determinedly, the old lady emptied the box of its contents. There were about 3,000. She handed it to her granddaughter. "As I recall, we didn't have a prom date, so tell whoever you need to tell. It's not out of favor that they're there to feed and water you." "Granny, go already." The old lady interrupted her and waved her hands as if she had chased away a butterfly that had accidentally flown into the house. "Or we'll be late." Camille left. Emily returned to the hall and sank into her favorite chair. Arms settled on the windowsills. She closed her eyes. Quietly, the clock flowed from beneath the closed ones. Tears rolled down the old woman's eyelids. But it was a light sadness. It was just a sudden realization that everything had grown up. Her granddaughter, though she tried to keep her from stupidity and temptations of vices of this world. I guess people are right. It's impossible to hide it from young people. Well, it remains, then, to hope only that it will not do any harm at all, that at least a little John in her head was able to put. And then Emily dozed off. Classmates saw Camille in the update, but the main thing in unusual such a form did not immediately recognize who was in front of them. For a while the cheerfulness died down and all eyes were fixed on the one who had come. Some of the guys whistled, and many girls looked at her with envy. It turned out that this girl had a gorgeous figure, and her hair was usually hidden in tight braids. Now she had lush silk curls. Camille. Anatoly Vladimirovich, the headmaster, approached the girl. "Are you gorgeous?" He simply spread his hands. I wouldn't be lying if I said that I had never seen a more beautiful graduate in my memory. Much later, looking back on that day, Camille understood that its bright events merged in the end into one long action, like multicolored glasses in a kaleidoscope are folded into one pattern. But this was true of the day until the moment when, after a walk in the park, a familiar voice suddenly called out to her. The sun was already slanting toward sunset. Its fiery golden rays penetrated the green of the trees and still blinded. So Camille squinted, and the silhouette of the guy standing nearby turned out to be quite blurred. "Stephen disbelieving," she said. The rest of the graduates didn't even notice her slipping away. Their first impressions had time to dissipate, and they were more interested in each other's company, leaving the oddly familiar to their high school roommate. As in years past to herself, Stephen stood at the entrance to the park, again in ripped jeans. But the jacket was a new brownish red and true to size. "Congratulations," he said and smiled. "Did you drop out of school after all?" the girl said reproachfully, although when she almost ran towards him, she wanted to say something else. "Busy. I had an apartment to sell and a summer house." He glanced from top to bottom and smirked back. "You're pretty, aren't you? Well, I'll leave you to it." He nodded at the group of school children in the distance. "I don't mind," Camille replied. "I guess I don't fit in after all." "You don't have to," said Stephen. "You'll find people you feel comfortable with." It was a strange word, and a phrase for him in general. Camille squinted. "So you've decided to leave after all?" "I have to find my place somewhere." "Okay." He clearly wanted to say something else, but he faltered and retreated a step. "Good luck, Camille. I didn't get a chance to say what I wanted to say." What do they need to talk about? That he's not completely alone. That she has to understand, just has to find out how to help him and... But all these thoughts were born in her mind. She couldn't put it all out coherently right now. She could only stare at him. How she needed him to take the tiniest step towards the tiniest drop himself. But he sent her a mesmerizing stare instead. His face contorted stiffly. And he, turning around, simply rushed to run to the bus stop. A shuttle bus stopped there, And at the same time, it seemed painfully clear that he was not just rushing toward the shuttle bus, but that he was running away from it, and from the conversation that could have taken place between them. Figures of swans surrounded by live snowy white hyacinth with flecks of icy pink, and we were beautiful. And if the organizers of this wedding reception had been asked to name the most successful element of the banquet decorations imposed, she would have pointed to these ice sculptures, rhythmically nodding a mini pen on the spread of a notebook, the entries in which were such small abbreviations that only their creator was able to decipher it. The girl looked at her creation magnificently. Thanks to this order, she would finally close the mortgage for the apartment. And also, perhaps, after it I can treat myself to a vacation, in which I have not been for the last 2 years. With a satisfied sigh and a nod to her own reflection, Camille returned the writing utensils to the pocket of an immaculately modest tailored, smoke-something gray. The jacket that made up the set with the pencil skirt, plus the silk blouse of a delicate lavender hue, was stylish but not overly dressy. After all, she is a responsible person here, and in no case should not compete with the bride or even the guests. "Guys, this way." There was a voice behind her through the open door. Camille's eyes widened. Some workers with a stepladder and some other guy in a black suit entered the room. Over there, the guy stretched out, pointing at the wall. More precisely, on that part of it, which was located behind the seats for the young and was generously traumatized with silk and spoil, the folds of which were supported by golden Cupid figures. "Hey, what are you doing?" Resentment flooded in. "Trespassing on her domain. Girl, don't you dare touch anything here." The workers stopped and turned to their superiors, and the superiors to her security detail. Threw a tall brunette and stuck his thumbs behind the belt of his pants smirked. It came out extremely cocky. "We're working. Please do not interfere. Do not interfere," indignantly flashed Camille. "Yes, do you know how long we've been laying this down? What do you think you're doing? Why didn't I do anything?" And then she was silent, because the young man's face seemed familiar. Stephen. Apparently, the mutual recognition came to them synchronously. "Camille," he said, "what are you doing here? A wedding?" She answered simply and, in general, quite matter-of-factly. "What are you doing here?" "I'm working too," he said. "So what are we doing?" asked one of the workers. "Yes, wait, you." Stephen brushed it off and focused his attention back on the young woman in front of him. He had remembered her all these years, while he had been busy putting his life back together in a shard. And she remembered him too often, more often than he would have liked to remember a guy he knew from high school, not even a classmate. A close encounter that had taken place under less than romantic circumstances, but that had been in the past. And now they exchanged a few more phrases, and it turned out that Stephen was the head of security of David's fiance's father, a complicated man, a businessman, and even an oligarch. Stephen had spent almost all these years in other parts of the world, and then to work in a solid reputation in the security industry, decided to return to the city, which still considered the most native place. And this is where he eventually found his best job. "I never would have guessed," Camille said frankly, when Stephen told her what he was doing. "Well, of course, with my pedigree and track record," he replied. And it was not clear whether he was really offended or whether he was being kindly ironic about himself. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean it." Camille immediately fell into confusion. "It's okay, it's so familiar. It's like all those years of separation never happened." Stephen smirked. "And you, then, are the creator of all this?" He circled the space with his hand. "It's pretty, but of course, terribly girly, if you know what I mean." "Not at all." Camille had always been very sensitive to criticism of her creations. She could only speak calmly about anything and everything directly to her clients. But the rest of us would be better off holding our tongues. Camille herself often regretted her temper, but found a reason for it. Apparently, it was inherited from her grandmother's temper. And the decoration is created taking into account the tastes and wishes of the bride and groom. Our agency is oriented on the current world trends in the field of wedding fashion, said the girl. Wait a minute, you bowed your head. What, you're married and you're doing things with your husband? Do you think that's the only way to do it? Did Camille frown again? No, it just occurred to me. He scratched the back of his head in a familiar gesture. I'm not married. That's wonderful. What do you mean? Never mind. So you started an agency with someone else, and you do weddings? Mostly them. But we also do wedding anniversaries, engagements. Do you do divorces? No. Camille was in such a weird state of mind talking to Stephen that she missed the ringing of her cell phone. The girl carried 2 miniature smartphones with her. The second one contained only personal contacts, and before such a neglectful part to her professional duties was not peculiar to her. Who would ever think of celebrating a divorce? I don't know. He shrugged. I went to the sea for 2 weeks to celebrate. I just lay on the sand and matured to move on with my life. I asked about you and thought that if you like weddings so much, you should probably be married already. Maybe even more than once. Why is that? To the first impressions of the meeting delighted surprise and even excitement. Heart palpitations begin to be joined by the familiar irritation of mere déjà vu. So it's weddings. How many different ones can be played, given the opportunity and imagination? Stephen spoke in a completely serious tone, but his eyes were laughing. I'm not married and haven't been yet, Camille replied, and nervously fixed her already perfect hair. The girl now wore a bob haircut. So what do you need to do here from the cameras? Lost the image of the hall. Apparently, you didn't cover it up with your fancy stuff. So put the camera somewhere else. This is a perfect angle. That's not my problem. The design's already been thought out and you can't change it. Who cares where the bows are? This is about safety. What, you're afraid of the bride being stolen? Don't worry. It's not in the script. I don't know anything. Stephen was suddenly dangerously close, literally hovering over her. With all his weight, Camille thought, inappropriately enough, that he had grown noticeably bigger or shoulders heavier. It's been 10 years, Stephen said. You haven't changed at all. Very much. The girl felt awkward, and for some reason she was sure that it was treacherous, and the blush was clearly visible, despite the tone, except Anna and powder. So what to do? One of the workers who had a lot to do couldn't stand it. It's scheduled for this day. Camille and Stephen backed away, just bounced off each other, as if to scare them off. The flock of birds scattered, and soon, with Camille's instruction, the textile decor was moved so as not to block the CCTV cameras. Now it's all ready, smugly said the girl, and Stephen visibly perked up. Then we can talk. Camille wanted to say that she was terribly busy, but that would be untrue. And besides, she herself wanted to talk to the man who made her heart beat. So strange. Often all these years it was still hours before the wedding reception at the bride's father's mansion, and Stephen and she had agreed to sit on the back porch of the house for a little while. It was the quietest place now. They sat down directly on the steps, the English-style garden in front of them disheveled as if wild, but in fact artificially grown. Camille talked about how, after studying 2 years at university to become a philologist, she had realized that it was absolutely none of her business. And it was. Decided to take a big risk just to make a living for a while, as it turns out, and in parallel to look for herself. In the end, it turned out that she liked to create holidays, and 5 years ago, she and Evelyn created a small agency, which by now has become one of the leading agencies in the city. Evelyn. Stephen was surprised. The one whose husband's an electrician, and they have a son, Kevin. I remember her. She always treated me differently, he added, and he averted his eyes differently than the others. I know, Camille nodded. She and I were talking about you the other day, and she told me all about how you weren't a monster at all. And when you reminded me, you thought I was a monster. He squinted as if with a grudge and invited me to the cottage. I swear, I smiled menacingly. It was the most nightmarish date of my life and mine. I'd give anything to have it any other way. I mean, what kind of idiot was I? Anyway, I should have just asked her out to the movies properly. I mean, you don't have to be afraid to say no. I see. The girl nervously sent a strand of hair behind her ear. The conversation had suddenly turned into a direction that was not the most convenient for a free conversation. How's your grandmother? Stephen asked. She's fine. I'm amazed at her age, and she's still chipper. Her health, of course, sometimes fails her, but she's strong enough for 10 people. You know, it's only recently that I've been able to understand her. I thought when I was just out of high school that I was out of a nightmare. And then I realized that she just loved me so much and thought it was to protect me. I spoke to the doctor. Grandma is seeing a psychologist, Camille explained. She agreed to see him to find out why she was having bad dreams. And then somehow he got her talking. And it's made our life together easier. Anyway, the psychologist doesn't want to scare her, but he said it's kind of an obsession. She was lucky she stopped in time. You know, I feel so guilty sometimes for leaving my grandmother alone for so long. But I got her a nurse, a very decent woman. She takes good care of her. Now Grandma doesn't need anything. The girl saw the skirt on her knees. She looked carefully at Stephen, catching his gaze. How long have you been divorced? Last year. I told you. We didn't see eye to eye. I guess I'm just not a good person. For some reason, I thought you'd changed since then, and not for the worse. So I don't think you're a bad Stephen. And your mother? She was careful. Do you know what's wrong with her? I mean, you didn't think of me finding her, Stephen replied. And it seemed that he was ready to answer frankly to this question, but only wanted to get off as soon as possible. We talked calmly, peacefully, and she apologized and told me not to show up again. She really has a whole other life. I don't belong there, but I forgave her. That's it. Camille fell silent. They just sat side by side and watched the wind move the tall, lush grasses and the flowers among them. I had completely forgotten. The Magister exclaimed menacingly. He is a solid age for a dog of a dozen, but he is fine. Stephen smirked. He actually lives here with me. He's in the enclosure now. Do you want to say hello? He stood up and gave his hand to the girl. I do. She stood up, accepting his outstretched palm. Do you want to bet? Stephen rounded his eyes. This was something he hadn't expected at all. Terms. The master will recognize me at once, and then you'll give me a personal tour of the place. Tell me, what does the security service do? I only know from the movies. You walk around and talk to someone on the radio all the time. Yes, Stephen almost answered. And if you lose, then you can take a chance and ask me out. The young man grinned. It was a very tempting offer. And whatever the outcome of the bet, he somehow had no doubt that the date would happen, and it would be very easy to turn it into an excursion. Stephen also thought about the fact that he might just have to become a really good guy now. It was necessary to become a good husband for Camille.